But school doesn't start as Wednesday, right?
Charleston started that. Correct. Yeah.
My grandkids are in Berkeley County School, so I think they start tomorrow.
Charleston today. Charleston today. You ready? Yeah. We're still starting. Okay, awesome. All right, we're gonna go ahead and call the meeting to order. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. A couple of quick administrative notes. The bathrooms are back out to the right, near the door. You hopefully all came in. Please feel free, when we have breaks, if that's on time, to go to view. Glad to be here out in Somerset. So our meeting objectives for today. We're gonna review and discuss surface water modeling results. John and Cam and the CDM Smith crew have been working hard on operating the SWAM model for our basin. Now that they've got some common watery model results. So we're gonna take a look at those in some detail, and we're gonna continue to discuss and select water management strategies as well. So with that, I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda for this morning.
So moved.
Second. Second. Any opposed? Awesome, thank you. John sent out, draft meeting minutes and meeting summary, that was Friday for our July meeting. And Jason, I know you had one line of clarification. I don't think it was anything too substantive, so I don't even remember what it was. Anybody else have any comments or concerns?
Adding the word even to something, yep, and then Todd had a typo that I corrected.
Okay. Sounds good. So ask for a motion to approve the minutes and summary from our July 8th meeting. Okay. Seconds.
Second.
Any opposed? Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Turn it back over to John.
All right, just a couple of quick introductions. New face with me today is Cameron Shea. Cameron's going to be talking about the modeling results. He's been behind the scenes running the SWAM model. So Cameron with CDM Smith is here today. And then online, Jennifer Simmons is a new person with the South Carolina Climate Office. She's taking over Elliot's position, Elliot Wickham, who left a while back. So she's going to be kind of coordinating drought. And I think Melissa Griffiths is on too. Melissa or Jennifer, do you want to introduce yourself, or Melissa, do you want to introduce Jennifer, or either do you want to unmute and just say a few words?
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I've been having some problems with my mic, but my name is Jennifer Simmons. I'll be taking over, as you mentioned, for Elliot as the water resources climatologist. I'm coming from the National Weather Service, spent 7 years with that, but really excited to come back to the state climatology office. I was an intern here when I was doing my graduate work at USC. So really excited to be involved with South Carolina again. So.
Great, thank you. And then a couple online RBC members, just so y'all know, John is online, John Grego, and Brandon Stutz is online. And are there any other RBC members that I missed that are online? I think it's just those two.
I think so. No reason.
Okay. All right. Some other newsworthy items. There was a water SC retreat last week, August 4th and 5th up in Greenville. There's a lot of great discussion at this day-and-a-half retreat. They spent a good amount of time talking about potential recommendations and reached consensus on a number of things. One, they all agreed that there should be support for ongoing state water planning activities beyond this year, basically. Second thing is that kind of goes hand in hand with water planning, is they all said that there should be funding, both public and private, for ongoing water planning. And they recognize that water planning and implementation of projects and other activities to support planning requires funding. Third one is that they all agreed that there should be more interstate discussions with Georgia and North Carolina about water management strategy. And then finally, they all agreed that there should be more education and outreach and They approved a recommendation to develop a communications plan for the entire state that focuses on water efficiency, water conservation. So it may not seem like a big list, but they did spend a lot of time kind of getting into the weeds on other issues like reasonable use and grandfathering and some of the same kind of permitting and legislative and regulatory issues that we've been talking about and others RBCs have been talking about. And they'll likely continue those discussions in their upcoming meetings. Joe, anything else?
That's a great summary, John. It was some good discussion. Good opportunity for that group to get to know each other better. And we look forward to continuing that discussion in September and as we continue to develop the state water plan.
All right. Public and agency comment. Any public or agency members here or online like to make comment? If you're online, just raise your hand.
I did want to share an opportunity for private landowners that are experiencing coastline erosion to get assistance to have living shorelines. This is a grant program through the Nature Conservancy and scores for the Nature Conservancy. So if y'all know anyone that would apply to, please let me know. They're prioritizing like historic sites, landowners that need assistance to put a living shoreline on their property, and they're kind of testing the process, trying to get those permits through DES, to understand the permitting process a little bit better. So that's of interest. I don't think it's enough to the group. I don't know if it's like relevant, but
We can send it out.
yeah, just let me know if y'all have any questions on that.
All right. Okay, moving on. Let's do a quick review of what we talked about in July. If you recall, we skip a little bit of lag. We spent most of the time continuing our discussion on policy type regulations, and we came to agreement or consensus on a number of recommendations that Jason and Alan initially proposed. We tweaked those a little bit, but the first one was about safe yield and using mean and median statistics. Second one was similar. Had to do more with contingency plans. We also approved recommendation about minimum stream flows and minimum water levels and using alternative hydrologic assessments, given unique hydrology throughout the state. To that, we kind of tacked on later in the meeting a recommendation about making sure that DES and DNR review the science behind MIF standards, ensure they're based on best available science. We also approved a recommendation about high industrial water users that purchase from a supply to provide more transparency around those high demands. And then there's a couple more that we generally agreed to, but we decided to hold off on full approval of them, pending trying to get some input from some ag representatives. And Alicia reached out to Landon Weathers, who's on Water SC and part of the Edisto RBC. He was hoping to come, but he had a conflict today. And in the meantime, we weren't able to really identify any other ag reps. And I don't know, is Sam Quinney online, Kim? Did you see him? Okay, he's with South Carolina Department of Agriculture. We're still a little lacking in ag representation, unfortunately. We'll see what we can do for our upcoming September meeting when we're going to attempt to finalize some of these recommendations. Maybe we can get some more ag reps here, or coax maybe Mickey to come back. Hopefully it's a slower time for him.
You heard how Sam was doing after whatever accident happened last month?
Yeah, actually, I saw him at the Lower Savannah Salcahatchee public meeting. He had tweaked his back. He's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, wasn't anything near fatal.
Good.
He's good. And then there was another one that we put in the yellow bucket for further discussion about minimum stream flows and mineral water levels based on median statistics. So we'll want to wrap up those discussions at the next meeting. Any questions about that? Okay. All right, let's move on. We've got several topics we want to discuss that focus on results of the modeling. But before we jump right into the modeling, I just want to give a kind of a quick refresher on the model itself. I spoke to the model back in February, but it's been 6 months since I did that. So I'm going to give you a very quick refresher. Next Tuesday, we have model training, and a good number of y'all signed up for that. I think 8 to 10 or so. We'll get more into the weeds then. If you have questions today, I'm happy to answer them, but we're going to really spend more time learning the modeling next Tuesday. Today, we want to focus kind of on the results. So if you remember, this is a water allocation model, right? And it's basically a water balance. Think of it as like a checkbook for the surface water system of the basin. It calculates basically physically available water, and we can set the model to calculate legally available water as well. So we include permit and registration limits in the model. The model knows and accounts for water withdrawals, whether it's current demands or future demands or some historical demands, however we set it, and then how much water is returned to the system through wastewater returns, discharges. It also accounts for reservoir storage and loss of evaporation in the reservoirs. It includes the rules that Santee Cooper and others use to operate the reservoirs. And it's a node-based system. What it's not is a model that does rainfall runoff calculations. We don't deal with rainfall. We deal directly with the USGS flow gauge data. So it's different than other models like HEC-HMS that does rainfall runoff calculations. It also doesn't do hydrologic routing calculations. We don't really care how big or small a riverbed or creek bed is. We're not doing calculations like HEC-RAS might do. We just want to know how much water is flowing through a system based on historical records and our demands and our returns and everything. It's also not a groundwater model, and it's not a water quality model, but it can be used to inform water quality models. So there's some linkage that can be done, actually both with groundwater and water quality, but we're not attempting to do any of that for now. I mentioned that one of the most important inputs is USGS daily flow records. That's probably the most important seed to the model. Historical operation data is also important. When we're developing the model and calibrating it, we want to be able to match an historical record. So we have to put in historical demands and returns and make sure that we're accurately reflecting stream flows at different locations, which are typically gauge locations. We also account for transfers in and out of the basin. For example, Charleston Water Systems transfer from the Edisto into the Santee is accounted for. And I mentioned before, reservoir characteristics. Every reservoir has a stage volume relationship that is included in the model. We make sure we have the most up-to-date information there if they've done recent bathymetric surveys so that we're accurately assigning an elevation to a certain level in the reservoir. And some supporting information that we use when we're building the model has to do with more drainage area and land use and slope, but those are kind of implicit into it as inputs into the model, not explicitly used. Okay, that's the upper part of the model. I apologize, it's kind of hard to see at this resolution, but again, we have little circles that represent where withdrawals typically are, or sometimes discharges. And you'll see next week when you click on those circles, it brings up information about how much water is used and when, where they return their water. Just to keep the diagram simple, we don't always show arrows to point out where water is being returned. We typically just show where it's being withdrawn. It gets kind of confusing to have too many arrows. That's the upper part of the basin, which includes everything up to just below the confluence of the Saluda and Broad. So we take inputs from the Saluda and Broad models that have already been built. Actually, the Saluda model, which incorporates flows from the Broad model, is our input point there. It also gets input from the Watery River, and that's coming from a different modeling system that the Catawba Watery Water Management Group has been using. And if you recall, we've talked about that, and that's kind of what we were waiting on. We finally got the inflows we need from them, and we're ready to show you the initial results. The bottom part of the model then below Lake Moultrie is represented by the Cooper River, and then kind of from the rediversion canal down on the Santee River. And that's where there's a lot more industrial use, Charleston's, got their withdrawals down there as well. The Witness Station, that's the bottom part of the model, kind of splits into two. So it's somewhat a unique model, for a number of reasons. And we'll talk about those reasons and how they're reflected in the results here in a little bit. We have been working on some updates over the last 6 to 10 months, which includes adjusting the hydrologic period of record and bringing it through 2019, which is the same period of record that the Saluda model is through. We have to limit it in this basin to the period starting in 1982, because the Catawba is only looking at 1982 and on. In other basins, we've gone all the way back to like 1929, so we have a longer period of record. And this one, it's a little shorter. It's only about 40 years. We've updated the inflows from the Catawba and the Saluda River basins, which includes the Broad. We've updated the mean water demands based on recent water usage. We've updated some permit and intake locations that have changed since the model was built back around 2016, 2017. A few permits have become inactive. We removed those users, added a few new registrations. We've made some minor adjustments to the stage storage relationships based on some information that Michael provided. And we've been, for the past month, making some adjustments to the rules governing releases from Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie. And we'll learn more about that later today and again next week, where we'll have the chance to kind of adjust those rules and see how they impact both lake levels and how much water is released into the rediversion canal or the diversion canal, and whether we can meet these minimum in-stream flows. That's one of the unique things about this model, is trying to maintain storage while also trying to maintain minimum in-stream flows and releases as per their permit rules. We've also made a few software updates that have made it a little easier to do scenario planning and to look at more what-if type simulations. And we'll probably talk about that more next week too. Cam's going to be presenting results, and those results focus on what we're calling performance measures. Performance measures are basically flow in the river. And we look at flow in the river primarily for low flows, and we're looking for differences between scenarios. For example, we're looking for differences between the current scenario, how things work right now, and 50 years into the future with our moderate and high demands applied to the system. And we want to see, like for the 5th percentile or the 10th percentile flows, which are those low flows, what's the impact? Do we see a significant change in those low flows? That's one example of performance measures. Percent change in surface water supply is just the minimum flow that you see at any one point. We're going to focus too on where there's shortages and what's the difference in the frequency and magnitude and duration of shortages between scenarios. So those are the main ones that we focus on, and we'll give you examples of many of those here in a minute. Okay, we've introduced the concept of strategic nodes before. Here we're highlighting what we've selected as initial strategic nodes, which for the most part, they all align except for one with existing USGS gauges. So we've got one starting at the bottom of the system going up. We've got one on the Santee River near Jamestown that corresponds to a gauge. Over on the Cooper, there's one just below Moultrie at the Tailrace Canal. One on the Santee River near Pineville, below Marion. And then just above Lake Marion, we've added one. We call it inflow to Lake Marion. So we can kind of see what flows are coming in from everything above, including Saluda, the Broad, the Catawba into Marion. And then moving upstream, we've got one on the Congaree River. That's a relatively new USGS gauging location that I'm calling Santee 10, but it's near Highway 601. I think it's only been there since 2022 or so, at least have discharge data since 2022 or so.
Where's the inflow to Marion located? Up around Remini or somewhere?
Like what town or city or? Michael, what's the closest?
I think is for the historically had gauge, but
Yeah.
We never had discharge on that because swaps
Spread,
on channel and we could get good stage discharge data there.
Okay.
Actually, recently USGS stopped supporting that location, for safety reasons and was the data volume flow.
You should check that a lot during duck season.
Yeah,
Is this a Santee Cooper supported gauge, do you know? Or no?
no, trying to remember, I think it was VOD, it was primarily funded.
Okay,
But I could be wrong on that.
Yeah. so as we look at results, if there's any other point in the system that you think may be of interest for some reason or another, and we need to add a strategic node there, we can add it in the model. But right now, we've kind of got a good spread up and down and on a few tributaries, including Cedar Creek and Gills Creek up in the upper part of the watershed. But that's what we're starting with as strategic nodes, and Cam's going to show you some results. And I should mention too, hopefully you all read the memo. You've seen some of this already. You've seen the table of flows between scenarios at each one of these nodes. So it should be making a little bit of sense if you had a chance to review the memo. Okay, last kind of refresher. We're looking primarily at water availability, right? And if there's any projected gaps or shortages in water availability now or in the future. For a river system with a user that has an intake on a river system, flow is variable. If you follow the blue line or the orange line here, it's up and down and up and down. And this red line here just represents a withdrawal. Every time the flow drops below that red line, there would be a shortage. They wouldn't be able to pull any water because there's not enough water to meet their full demand. This straight line is, again, a general representation. Usually there's kind of a monthly curve to it, depending on the type of year and the type of user. But you can see in this example, there's a number of times when there would be not enough water to meet the demand, right? In a reservoir system, we have what's called kind of a dead pool here, right? And that's basically the level of the intake, or there could be multiple intakes. And in this case, it could be the level of the highest intake in the reservoir. And that again represents above it represents the amount of available water supply. Below it represents the dead pool, part that you can't access and withdraw for water supply. And in this example, you can see during the drought of record in 2008, the water level in the reservoir, well, this is actually storage, not water level, but storage in the reservoir drops down right to the dead pool. Doesn't drop below it, but it drops right to it. So just a little bit different between, an intake and a reservoir. One has storage and one doesn't. And we've got examples of both in our model. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Cam. Cam's going to walk you through the results. You want to stay there, or do you want me to advance? Or
Sure, yeah, I can stay right here.
okay,
You guys can hear me.
okay,
All right, so as John mentioned, we were looking at several scenarios with the model. You can kind of see in blue the scenarios we were reviewing. We were recently looking at that we're going to talk about today. That is the current surface water scenario that uses the most recent 10-year average of withdrawals in most cases as the basis of the scenario. And then we also look at two future scenarios for our default. We use 2070 as the year for the future scenarios, and that can change depending on what you guys want to do. But for today, we're going to talk about the 2070 moderate demand scenarios. These are based off of a moderate growth and a projected normal climate. The demands were given to us by DES, and also a scenario where we look at the high demands if we have a hot, dry climate and increased demands. There's also another scenario that we'll look at in the future. It's the permanent registered scenario. It looks into what if every user withdraws their fully permitted and registered amount.
and that we'll come back to you next month with that scenario. It's a rather unrealistic scenario because we don't expect anybody and everybody. We don't expect everybody to be using their fully permitted registered amount at any one time. But it's kind of a good what if example of if that were to happen, and it helps us understand, is the basin over allocated based on existing permits and registrations? Okay.
So this table is a summary of the average annual surface water demands by scenario, also broken into by the sector. Key takeaways here is if you look at current use, you can really see the difference in demands of comparing agriculture and golf courses, their cumulative demands compared to industrial users, public water supply users, and thermoelectric users. One thing to note, this is demands. It can be expected that a certain proportion of the flow demand gets returned to the water body in most cases. For certain users like industrial or thermoelectric, whereas agriculture might use a higher proportion of the flow. In the model, effectively, all of the flow that goes to agriculture or golf courses is consumed by that object. Also, looking at current use, comparing that to the 2070 moderate demand, you can see that for some objects, the demand does not increase greatly, agriculture, golf courses, whereas, well, yeah.
I'm sorry, is this somewhere in this or this graph?
I don't think it made
No,
it.
that table's not in the memo. It's separate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Yeah. If you were to add up all of the demands in like tables, the first set of tables, you would see these totals, but we didn't do that in the memo. We've done it here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Which I will have this presentation after the RPC meeting, right?
Yes, yeah, it'll be posted to the website.
While we've taken a break in your rhythm, which I appreciate, question for you, make sure I'm looking at this right. So total all sectors between current use today and what we think in 2070, so 35 years from now, what is that number? 10% increase because of the thermoelectric coming off the withdrawal. So in, 40 years time or so, we're looking at a 10% increase in all sectors. Am I looking at that right? Joe?
Well, yeah, actually, one thing I see, it looks like Cam, that this number hasn't been updated. So that's,
Yeah.
yeah, this.
Yeah, 'cause that just seemed,
Yeah.
okay, there you go.
What we did want to point out is you see a big decline here.
Yeah.
So both the Wynya station and the Williams station are projected to go offline in by 2025 and 2030.
Yeah.
So we're losing two large energy users. Now, a lot of that water does get returned, but there's still a fairly high consumptive amount. But yeah, I apologize. This number isn't the accurate number.
It's not right.
Yeah.
There you go. That just didn't, 10% didn't seem right.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch that. There was a little bit of rush to get all this data together because we didn't get the inflows until kind of the last minute. Then there was, I'll talk about this later, some additional tweaks that we still have to make to the model based on dead pool elevations. But
John, if you add that up, that's gonna even be less. So now the demand in 2070 will be less than current use.
I think that's the way it is, yeah.
Yeah.
When we look at the results, you'll see there's very
That's-
little
to me, That's
difference.
staggering, right? Am I the only one that
Cool,
feels that?
cool plants and thirsty.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
now the one thing about Wynya is there are no other users downstream. So
Yeah.
The beneficial impact of that.
Yeah.
But either way, that's wild to see that our current use of surface water is gonna decline based on these totals.
Yeah.
What's the effective life of crops?
they're still trying to work that out. It's such a big piece of
Yeah.
our generating puzzle right now that I don't know that they've firmed up a retirement date for it.
It was built in the early 80s, late 70s.
And the 3 and 4 though were like O's.
Yeah, 2 and
Yeah,
1 were
no,
built
no.
first, yeah. But
So-
still, that's a long time for a coal-fired generating station.
It is.
So, but those are not projected to come off.
Well, in that 2070 number, it looks like they have to be, it crosses within the basin.
Okay.
I would say there's a lot of uncertainty, at least in my mind, on energy sector water use, not
Sure.
just for the Santee, but for upstream basins as well. For example, Duke has proposed some like small nuclear reactors in the Broad Basin in year 2050 or something, and they asked us to put that in the broad model scenarios. But it was for technology that hasn't even been fully figured out yet. But if you think about the growing increase for energy from AI and other things like that, and the fact that we've got 2 coal-powered stations that are going to be going offline, where's all the extra energy going to come from? It's going to come from somewhere. there's also a de-emphasis from the current federal administration on solar and wind. Not that wind's a big thing in the state, but with the loss of subsidies and de-emphasis of other renewable sources, to me, it just seems like there's going to have to be a lot more gas-fired plants.
Or smaller nuclear.
Or smaller nuclear, right?
The Navy's put nuclear reactors in just about every major boat that they build now, and those things all have an impeccable track record. Why not take that technology and bring it to service?
Yeah.
So,
But nuclear, natural gas, even coal-fired, they all require water. They're getting more efficient, but they require water.
which is
Renewable
the
is-
highest water user? Is coal the highest water user?
I think it probably is. I couldn't tell you definitively, but I know natural gas is significantly more efficient, and they're even starting to build some air-cooled units, which are even less heavy on the water use.
Yeah, and a good example, kind of seemingly out of the blue, in the upper Savannah River Basin, Anderson County, just a couple months ago, Duke announced, we've got plans to do a new gas-fired plant up there, which, hadn't been in the at least publicly accessible plans that they had put out before. Just, they saw this increasing demand and said, we're gonna do a new plant here. That was after we'd already finished the modeling in the upper Savannah, but it's just a new plant that suddenly kind of popped up out of nowhere. Is there a comment online, Ken?
Yeah, John Grego mentioned because thermoelectric is largely non-consumptive use, I wonder if we should add plots of consumptive use in the chapter 4 graphs.
Yeah, that's something we can do, John. Yeah. Okay, any other, we'll fix that number so we can have a better comparison, but Alan, you're right. Current use and moderate use are very similar. I think moderate slightly lower than current total.
But one last thing to note with this, the 2070 high demand, some of the values that we use for the individual users actually exceed their current permitted and registered use for about, I think it was 6 objects. That's what I consider.
So the assumption there is they would ask for and receive their permit limits based on their growing demand over the next 50 years. Okay.
Okay, so in this table, this is kind of, as John was talking about earlier, a summary of the inflows to the model because the Santee is at the bottom of several models upstream. The main stem takes into account the outflows of the Saluda and the Broad model. And we can see the difference in those current flow versus the projected 2070 flow or for both the moderate and the high demand. And there's also the Catawba model and the Wateree that uses slightly different assumptions when creating its high demand flows for the 2070 moderate demand and the 2070 high demand. Takeaway here is that you can see the main stem drops by about 2% when you compare the current use flow to the 2070 or 0.2%. When you compare the current use flow scenario to the moderate future scenario, and then slightly higher increase when you look at the high demand scenario in the future. But when we compare that to the Wateree, we see that there are larger increases in both the moderate and the high demand in the future.
And I think we kind of touched on this before, and Cam just referred to it. The Catawba Wateree Water Management Group is using the different approach to estimate future demands and populate their scenarios. We have a moderate high demand scenario, which behind them have their own assumptions. They have what they're calling like probabilistic demand scenarios. We've used their 50% probabilistic demand scenario, which is, as far as we could tell, most similar to our moderate scenario. But again, it has different assumptions into it. And then for the high demand, we've used their 95th percentile probabilistic scenario. And just by looking at the results, it looks like their 95% demand, probabilistic demand scenario is probably more severe, more conservative, so higher water use than we might be assuming for our high demand scenario in South Carolina basins. Outside of that difference, I can't really get too much into the weeds, but just want to recognize that the Catawba is a little different as far as how they develop their demand scenarios and then how those get reflected in the inflows coming into the Santee.
Don, do you know when you look at inflows, in these basins, some of these basins are, gonna have massive expansion of residential housing or development in general in South Carolina. And the impervious surface versus pervious surface, and, has that been accounted for? Someone, is that part of this model? I would expect
Yeah.
inflows to be higher.
Yeah.
Because of development.
Yeah.
But
And
that's not the case.
So that's a really good point. Our model doesn't account for changes in land use and how that might impact the hydrologic regime,
Gotcha.
right? So we're assuming no change in land use now through 2070 and no more impervious surface. But in reality, you would expect flows to potentially become flashier.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
we've seen massive changes in
Right.
land use in the last 5 years
Right.
in South Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's been a pretty significant topic of discussion in all the other RBCs. They're interested and concerned about that and how results could change 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the future if there's significant development that changes the overall kind of flow regime or increases the peaks and lowers the valleys of stream flow. Jason.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is when you look at a flow curve of runoff, you're gonna have more of a tailing. If you don't have impervious, it'll be more of an immediate spike, Gaussian distribution if you have more impervious. But your net contribution to the watershed, your supply from inflow should be the same, especially on a month timetable, regardless of impervious. You do get into whether it's a recharge zone and things like that, but the reality is, I don't think it'll, on a month time basis, make that much difference to have increased impervious surface. It will change flood mitigation, water quality, things like that.
Well, a lot of communities now have their stormwater regulation ordinances requiring you to store more than the difference between pre and post under design storm event all the way up to 100 years. So you're gonna get flow, but it's gonna be somewhat delayed. It's not gonna spike the way it has in the past.
And that's more regulation.
I mean, Horry County, we've got to store 120% of 100-year storm. Now, weeks like we've had this last 2 weeks where it rains every day, all the reservoirs are full, so you get a lot more peak runoff. But during normal periods of rainfall and flow, the development communities mitigated that a lot due to MS4 regulation.
One thing that the Catawba is doing that's different than the rest of the South Carolina basins, and they're doing it for both the North and South Carolina portion of the Catawba Basin, is using a model that the Research Triangle Institute has developed called Waterfall that can look at changes in impervious. So it's more of a rainfall runoff type model as opposed to SWAM or KEOPS, which is more of a SWAM type of model that they also use in the Catawba, but they're using it to answer the question that you just posed. Is development going to change how water flows through the system? So actually, it'll be an interesting case study. I'll be interested to see what comes out in their integrated water resource plan that's supposed to be finished later this year with regard to impacts of development and how that might look. That could.
It's actually flooding. It's actually the opposite. When the lady, the climatologist came in and talked to us about storms and that sort of thing. In my part of the world, the severe flooding is caused by rising rivers, not by the development. But the development in the wrong places sometimes, so it costs the house to get that much water in when the river comes up. But storms like Floyd cause a lot of flows in the river. So it has the opposite effect of, instead of more runoff affecting the basin, it's the basin affecting the development.
Scott also mentioned that reservoirs will moderate and regulate peak flows as well.
Yeah, good point. Okay, that just gives you an idea of kind of the boundary conditions coming into the model, the inputs coming in from the Catawba, then in the Saluda and the Broad. Okay, Cam.
So now we're going to look at where we actually see simulated shortages and the frequency and magnitude for each scenario. So what we have is the current use scenario. This red circle, it indicates a water user object that had a physical shortage. For the current use scenario, and this is in the memo, I believe, we have 3 projected shortages on the trips to the main stem. At Halfway Swamp Creek, we have 2 agricultural objects experiencing 0.02 and 0.002 MGD max shortage. The percentage of shortage is between about 6 and 3.5%. That's IR Darkin Waukesha and IR Leonsboro's. And then a little bit further, near Jackson Creek is a golf course, GC the members. It experiences a max shortage of 0.001 MGD and 0.4% frequency of shortage. That's just what our model is giving us. We'll have another slide that kind of is a bit of nuance to this data to talk about. So with this is an example of the golf course, the members, which we just noted a shortage being on. If we actually pull up an aerial of the golf course, we can see these red circles are its intakes that we have modeled. But on those intakes, there are a couple of impoundments. We measured around 60 acres of impoundments. That is beyond the detail of our model, but in times of shortage, that will be able to provide water, and potentially that the shortage that we see in our model might not be 100% realistic in the field when you have these impoundments.
They don't have a well backup.
That is another thing too. They could have groundwater wells that we don't have data for. Agricultural users, the 2 other agricultural users that are experiencing shortages on Halfway Swamp Creek. We didn't see from the aerials like the same kind of impoundments, but they, like you said, they could have groundwater that we don't have in the model, or they could be pooling just maybe there is enough impoundment from the swamp. It's a very swampy creek, hence the name, but
Shouldn't there be some coordination there to make sure that when you're predicting that, they don't have well backup? I mean, most golf courses have got another source.
Yeah. We haven't always looked up to see if they have conjunctive use capabilities, but a lot of them often do. I think in the Edisto, we saw a similar, well, let me back up. In all the basin models, we've typically seen shortages along tributaries to the main rivers, right? And especially up near the headwaters, and they're almost always typically for agriculture users and sometimes golf courses. Most of the examples that we've seen are like the members golf course, where Cam showed this example of small impoundments that we don't reflect in the model. There's just too many impoundments throughout the state to put those into the model. They're small. We don't have good information on how much water they store. There's no point in really trying to model all those at the scale that we're doing it. So generally, we've recognized that, well, the model suggests there might be a shortage, but in reality, they probably have storage that helps them get through those drought times. And we haven't really focused on those shortages, and we haven't really tried to identify water management strategies that might help them out, with the understanding that a lot of them do conjunctive use and a lot of them have impoundments.
So golf course ponds are normally relatively deep because there's 2 purposes, one to store and the other as a source for dirt.
Yeah.
To build a course. So I know the ones that we've been involved in, some of these lakes 20, 30 feet deep. So the acre foot of storage, depending on what the low level intake is significant.
Right. So I don't want to say we typically ignore these small infrequent shortages on smaller tributaries, but we haven't put a lot of emphasis on them when we've been thinking about water management strategies. So keep that in mind. Not that, we shouldn't consider it. In fact, I think, one of the recommendations from a lot of the other RBCs is that, hey, those small impoundments really do, they're meaningful during time of low flows in these smaller streams. They help them get through. Jason.
I mean, and I think it's fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, whether you're talking about an agricultural plot or a golf course, I mean, though these ponds are pretty as part of a golf course experience in ag, they end up with ponds and maybe they stock them, but the reality is these entities have ponds for a reason to mitigate low flows, but they've experienced a long time over potentially generations of experience that they know about it, they've mitigated it, they have these supplies for a reason, and it wouldn't be news to them if we informed them that they're gonna have some low flows in their ditch.
Exactly, yeah. So the two on Halfway Swamp Creek, they don't have impoundments. They pull right from the creek. But, you know, what do you notice about Halfway Swamp Creek? What is there not located on Halfway Swamp Creek? No gauge, exactly. So, you know, we talked earlier back in February about where there's uncertainty in the model. That's one of the areas where there's some uncertainty because we're estimating what flow might be in that. And we know it's actually more difficult to estimate flow in some of the more swampy, low-lying areas for a number of reasons. So I don't hold a lot of confidence that we've got the flows simulated precisely in that creek. It's just a guess. You know, we had to use a nearby reference gauge, probably in the Edisto, to set flows for this. And that's typically what we do for every tributary that doesn't have a gauge on it, which is a good number of them in the upper part of the basin. You know, in fact, there's only, can't read those, but Jackson Creek and Cedar Creek that have gauges on them up there. So keep that in mind too. There's uncertainty around flows here and then obviously these small percentage of shortages because of that. Any questions about that?
What's the cost of installing a gauge?
Brooke or Scott, we've talked about this before, but I can't remember.
A gauge, with just stage can be, I mean, I think like yearly cost like $5,000 a year, but a gauge that.
That's with telemetry, so it
We're talking
reports.
more than 20 a year. Yeah, they're very expensive and we, in previous years, we did a lot of work putting in more gauges and a lot of these smaller swampy areas just aren't appropriate for gauges because you can't get to them where the flows aren't consistent. So, but it's very expensive. It might be at like 8 and 25 now on the things.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, 8 and 25. Okay, yeah. It was 5 and 20, but now, yeah.
And we're not getting quality data from them right now either with USGS staff shortages.
I know.
So
And has to, if you find one that you install in a place that's not helpful, can you move it and put it somewhere else?
Yes, I do. Yes, yeah, you could,
So
but
you could
we have-
relocate one that's not getting efficient data.
Well, if there's ones that are not run by the USGS, there's just a whole lot of red tape involved in that. But if there's smaller areas that are using them, but I don't know if those gauges are appropriate to use in a model if they don't have length of time.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
What if someone snuck in during the middle of the night, put it in their backpack and moved it? And it reappeared somewhere else, would that be okay?
well, there's a lot more to it than just putting a new gauge in spots and they getting records. You know, they have to go out and figure out the hydraulic profile of the stream and they've got to develop a curve over different flow levels where they measure velocity in the stream and elevation. And that's how then they convert stage to flow. So the cost of them, I think, is just more in the labor and the maintenance and the developing.
Part of that equation is Q equal BA, the A.
Exactly.
part.
Exactly.
You don't know that a lot of survey involved in getting the
and
trapezoidal.
it can change too when you have debris settle in the channel. So it's not just a one-time thing. You gotta be going back out there to make sure.
Maintain, you've got to maintain.
Yeah.
Yes, that can also impact your velocity. Depending on, you know, if the tree branch falls right upstream of the gauge, then you're getting bad numbers, both from an area perspective and from a velocity perspective. And all of a sudden you could be way out and not know it.
Right.
Right.
Scour from storms changes the profile.
Two things noted. John mentioned that the ponds at Wildwood should be considered at least as much an amenity for Wildwood residents as golf course ponds.
Okay.
And he also mentioned that the Midlands Nature and Bird Alliance has a 500 acre sanctuary on Leon's Creek, a halfway swamp tributary. I'll ask them if they have any insights on surface flow there.
Okay.
And then Scott has his hand raised.
Yeah, Scott, did you have a comment?
About the gauges. What
Yeah,
was
go ahead.
the question?
Oh, there's an original question about cost of gauges, and I think Brooke and Michael kind of answered that, the range of cost at least.
Okay, well, it's 8,000 for just stage and 17,500 for stage discharge.
Okay. And that's just the upfront cost. Then there's annual kind of maintenance and recalibration, upkeep.
Those are the annual fees, and yeah, there's an upfront first year cost, which can't remember off the top of my head what that is, but it's a little bit more.
And then you can add another $5,000 for, at least for a water quality parameter or two. And you just think about a stage which has both quantity and quality data being multiple $10,000 a year over a 30-year horizon. You're talking about quite the asset.
Yeah.
Of data cost to make that happen. And like someone pointed out, there's definitely been a shortage in USGS staff due to early retirement incentives. So it'll be interesting to see how the gauges continue to be supported in the near term.
Yeah, it seems like there's gonna have to be more private sponsors, even more private sponsors than there are now to keep that
Even,
going.
even at privately sponsored sites though, where they still have to have a staff member show up. I mean, we have 2 fully supported gauges by Charleston Water System. Still need the staff.
Yeah.
Contracts being paid, still need the staff to show up.
Encountering the same thing.
Scott raised his hand again.
Yeah, Scott, did you have another comment?
Yes, now if someone from SCORE is there, they might be able to weigh in on this, but my understanding is that in the Saluda Basin, that SCORE got a grant to install a number of gauges that come from Clemson Intelligent River Program. They've developed some sensors, low-cost sensors, and I think it's primarily staged, but I think they're also experimenting with using some of this to get some discharge measurements as well. So there are other entities out there working on monitoring to keep in mind, and we'll see how well these sensors do in the Saluda. I don't know if anybody from SCORE there can add to that.
Catherine's here, but she just stepped away for a second, like right when you started talking. So when she comes back, we'll confirm with her.
Yeah, and my understanding is that they were putting over 100 out. I'm not sure exactly where. I'm looking to get more information, but I don't have it all yet.
Yeah. I mean, that could be the future possibly is more inexpensive, but potentially lower quality flow records.
Yeah, I think that's the question is, especially if you're measuring discharge, what's the uncertainty in their measurements, I think will need to be known.
Right.
But you don't always need may not always need the accuracy the USGS can get, so you got to weigh the cost versus the quality sometimes. Anyway, it's just be part of the conversation going forward. That's all.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let's move on to moderate demand scenario.
Right, so now we have the results of the 2070 moderate demand scenario. And you guys kind of identified a trend earlier, but you'll see it, is that we don't see a significant increase in shortage. We still have the same 3 shortages from the current use scenario. But if we look at the max shortage and the frequency of shortage, it's roughly the same as the current use scenario. So we see shortages between 0.001 and 0.01 MGD. Frequency is about the same as well. Oh, one more thing to note, these results are preliminary. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. There might be some tweaks to the model. Probably won't affect upstream in these trips though.
Yeah. Catherine just walked back in. Scott mentioned SCORE had funding for some.
Yeah, we're piloting intelligent river boxes through Clemson University in the Saluda watershed. So these are low cost sensors. They're about, I think, $2,000 a piece. They should last around 2 years of battery life. And then my understanding is that they're kind of like disposable. They wouldn't be really maintained. They'd be replaced after 2 years. But we're looking into that for how to add some density to sensors in the state. We'll kind of see how that goes. They're still working out some kinks with how the data is processed and gathered across the state. And I actually just had a conversation trying to integrate other low cost sensors like the Pohanu sensors. I don't know if I'm familiar with that. How we can integrate that to like a statewide network so it's not siloed by the provider of the sensors. So if anyone's interested, I could get some more details on that. But
y'all are primarily interested in flooding though, so and there's a little bit of a difference in what we're interested in. We're interested in low flows. They're more interested in high flows. Which I think is probably reflected by the type of sensor you'd use and whether you're looking at stage or flow, where you put them.
Right.
That type of thing.
And right now they're working out some kinks too with like DOT and which bridges, they can put sensors on. So I think some of it's just dependent too on where they're allowed the sensors, so.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious if we can use them for cost purposes.
Are they also monitored?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
All the details.
What staff will be monitoring them?
I think it's the Clemson.
The Clemson, okay.
Yes. It's not understanding.
Okay, and high demand scenario.
So looking at the high demand scenario, what we don't see is new objects experiencing a water user shortage. But we do see for the objects in the current demand scenario, having a slight increase in shortages. Not significant, but not a drastic increase. You can look at a dark and cold share, we go up from 0.02 to 0.2, and then a higher increase in frequency of shortage as well. So also looking at shortages for users, we looked at, actually this is a summary of the water supply shortages for all the users. We can see that, the total annual it's the mean shortage, but the annual mean shortage is somewhat consistent between the current use and the 2070 moderate demand scenario for pretty much all of the statistics that we're looking at here. Whereas in the high demand scenario, we see an increase in the shortages across all of the statistics, but still overall pretty low.
Yeah, so one thing I would point out, which I think is gonna be obvious to most, so 9.1% of surface water users are experiencing shortage, but the reality is those shortages represent a very, very, very small percentage of overall use.
Right.
So these numbers are, if somebody was just to quote, because this is the danger with statistics, right?
Yeah.
There's 9.1% of users within your basin in these scenarios are gonna be short.
Right.
It wouldn't be a accurate representation of the situation in the basin.
Right. Yeah.
And on top of that, it was those users we were just discussing too.
The only thing I would add is it might be valuable on the previous slide, if you go back one, to put in that little table on the left, what their actual supply is, so that when you have a max shortage, obviously their supply is very, very small, because we're talking about shortages of numbers that are very, very small, but it just might help with the scope of overall demand across the basin and understanding that we're talking about a fraction of a percent that's under shortage versus 10% shortage.
Yeah, good point. I agree. We don't usually focus very much on these basin-wide statistics. We kind of put them up there to compare quickly
I'm
scenarios.
just saying, somebody's pulling the public information, looking for a good news story,
Yeah, I understand.
like they do.
Yeah, Alicia.
One question, I saw that Charleston Water is planning, or in here, we're planning on an increase from 92 MGD to 300 MGD. Is that real?
Were you just doing that? 300?
On the
I don't remember the exact one.
1970 average annual demand. I mean,
What page are you on?
2070, I'm sorry. Table 3. I don't know what page I'm on, because they're not numbered.
I'm gonna say 300.
Is it 7?
For your 2070 high demand, does that sound too high, Jason, for your total demand?
Yes.
And then even in 2070, your average being 181, like you don't have capacity for that.
You said table 3.
Pages 6 and 7, I think.
Oh, I see. Yeah, if you look at the growth over the last 50 years, which we're talking not low growth population demand driver growth curves here, we're talking between the tri-county area that we serve growing between 15 and 30%. So it's not like moderate or high demand is those percentages are gonna double. Even if they sustain those, that would be high demand. You gotta look at the demand increase over the last few decades. And if you project those population growth, using population as the driver into 2070, assuming similar per capita use. And I actually think our per capita use other than being relatively steady, has been biased due to the industry. But there's no way we're gonna be at 300 MGD by 2070.
Remember that we're applying the same set of assumptions for all public users when we do this, when DNR developed the demand, excuse me, DES and previous DNR developed those demand projections. A lot of public water suppliers said they might not necessarily be realistic, but it's kind of the high end projection for that high demand scenario. But Scott, if you have a chance, could you just double check that what you gave us shows, what is it, 300? What's the number in the table? 300 MGD for Charleston?
Yeah, and that's, yeah, I'll double check that. You give me a couple minutes.
2070, okay.
I will say this, though. Even with 300, we're not showing a shortage.
Right.
So sometimes keeping it from the standpoint of, even if, and I'll tell you, it's not gonna happen. We got 300 by 2070. There isn't supply shortage.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
That's the information for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, that's the big number in that column.
Yeah.
It's like, where did we put all that?
I'd be glad to know it, but yeah, that's not gonna.
So part of that 300 demand though is being satisfied from the Edisto. Part of it's being satisfied from this Santee Basin, right? So, yeah, there could be. In fact, I think in the high demand scenario that we had for the Edisto, there was a shortage.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is when we do the projection modeling, and Scott can speak to this, each of the users work with Scott to come up with the projections to make sure they're accurate as possible. Because Charleston Water System can blend up to 3 sources, and we can switch to the Bushy Park or Edisto source almost 100% at this point at our current demand curve. We need to make sure that we project accurately the potential if the ratio was to be in either source into the future. So that there necessarily has to be some worst case modeling when we're doing high demand projections in Bushy Park Basin or Santee Basin, assuming the majority of our demand comes from the Santee Basins. We need to know what those demands are. Conversely, we did that and had to do that to some extent on the Edisto, but the reality is you could generically split it 50-50 and project and then be short or high in basins, or you could put it all in one basin and be over in one. The bottom line is the high demand is going to look at kind of a worst case scenario, and maybe that's where this comes from. But I can tell you the peninsula's population isn't growing by 50 or by 200%. And then as you move, that's what I'm saying, you can only build such high-rise buildings down there. And then as you go into the parts of Berkeley and Dorchester County where the commissioners, Charleston Water System has our system, again, there can be growth. There could be 15 to 30% growth over that horizon. It wouldn't equal 300 MGD. And the reality is if the Tri-County area continues to grow at that rate, or especially a greater rate, it would be into other providers' distribution systems, not ours.
Yankees left.
Yeah, and that's already happening. I mean, Charleston County proper doesn't have the growth that Dorchester or Berkeley does. So you're already seeing that where can you build? You gotta have land that isn't already used. There's only so much you can reuse, and it's usually cheaper not to reuse. And then you get into city ordinances, historical districts, all that kind of thing. The sprawl's not in the city. Sprawl's gonna be outside the city limits.
Some definition of small.
Yeah.
You'd like to keep them.
But I will take this back to our commissioners and let them know. No shortages at 300. They'll be surprised.
Again, that's not, remember, we did have shortages in the
Done
Edisto.
at 300.
You were on the Edisto RBC. I think there were Charleston shortages at Gibbons Ferry for the Edisto at the same demand that we've got here. So,
Your chemist.
okay. Okay. Shortages for water users, for off-stream uses, is one thing. There's also in-stream uses. Cam, you want to explain this slide?
Sure. So there's a couple different demands that the in-stream, we represent them as in-stream flow objects, but there's permanent releases at Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie. And like I said, we represent them as these in-stream flow objects. At the Santee, on Lake Marion, we have the Santee in-stream flow object. This is an object that, we're looking to get, depending on the time of year, 2,400 to 1,200 CFS flowing into the Santee with a minimum of 600 CFS. And we can see that we have some shortages. The max shortage in MGD, that 1,163 value, that equates to 1,800 CFS. So if you think about it, that's that. If we're trying to get to 2,400 CFS max and we're releasing 600 CFS at all times to the Santee River, that's the difference that equates to the shortage. And we can see that we have frequency of shortage that gets triggered at when the Lake Marion drops below a certain point. We only release 600 CFS, and we can see that happening around 20% of the time in the current use through the high demand scenarios.
That's close to the little 2 megawatt plant up there.
In
It's
the
still,
in the short term, it's actually gonna spill it because the juice just isn't worth the squeeze from a power generating perspective.
okay.
So does that make sense to everybody that, Santee Cooper wants to release 12 and 2,400 depending on the time of year, but to maintain lake levels, and we'll get to that in just a second, there's not always enough water to be able to release that amount. So we're representing the times when there's not enough water to release that amount as the in-stream flow shortage, which happens about 20% of the time in each one of the scenarios.
John, as far as this slide goes, so the shortage really is at sorry, let me back up. For Jeffrey's Hydro here, that's also covering the rediversion canal discharges.
Yes.
Okay, so it might be worth clarifying.
And those ought to be separated.
Yeah, that's really Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie
Yeah.
would be. Or, I guess my point is that seems to communicate there's a shortage on Cooper River when there's really not. Does that make sense?
Are you
Calling
talking,
the Jeffries in-stream flow
Right.
object Jeffrey.
oh, down here, you're talking about this guy. Yeah, yeah,
St.
no, that's
Stephen
representing
And the
both.
spillway both go directly to the Santee.
Right, no, so we're gonna look in a second at the table here, where we're gonna focus on this flow to make sure we're getting 4,500. So that's where we're kind of checking to see, are we meeting the 4,500 coming out of here, and we use this gauge that way. This one, we're kind of combining both the 4,500 and the 5,600 that you want to send through the rediversion canal during March, April, and part of May.
It makes it be worth tweaking that terminology, so there's nothing
Okay,
on that table in particular.
okay,
So delineating which flow is going to which.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Even with the noted.
Yeah.
Clarify.
And just so we're on the same page, the Jeffries in-stream flow object, we're trying to release 4,500 CFS to the Cooper River at all times. And then there's a discretionary flow that we're trying to hit during fish passage months, so like in the spring, to the Moultrie rediversion canal. And when we see shortages experienced, what we're really talking about is shortages experienced in the fish passage flow, which is around 5,600 CFS in those months.
and that's a new requirement of your new permit. I mean, was there even any requirement at all in the old permit, or?
It wasn't explicitly stated before we got the license.
Okay.
It had been kind of informally implemented, date back all the way to 2007. So
No.
if you look at the record, you're gonna see how that target is influenced in-stream flow in the Santee River. But it was not formally included as a target for us until 2023.
Okay,
But even then, it's got a lot of wiggle room because it's a recognition that there are times where inflows just aren't sufficient to hit it. And it's kind of I won't say the least important, but it's the least impactful place we can reduce flows out of the system.
okay. Okay, so again, this basin's a little bit unique. This is the first time where we've really had these in-stream flow targets. We've had other basins where there's a minimum required release, like Lake Murray has a required release for striped bass or something parts of the year. But they're always able to meet that without upstream shortages or shortages from Lake Murray or being able to maintain water levels in Lake Murray. In this instance, it's kind of interesting that we see that, well, we're meeting all the off-stream use demands. There's really no shortages except for those few that we mentioned in tributaries. But we're not always able to meet the in-stream demands, at least as per their FERC license. So it kind of gives us a reason to consider some water management strategies we're going to talk about later. Is how do we minimize these the 20% of the time or 8% of the time when there's not enough water released to meet the target flow? Does that mean we try to implement water efficiency practices upstream so we can have a less frequency of excursion below the shortage?
So, John, one thing I would say is just for everybody's clarification on the council. I mean, if you read the FERC license, which I would recommend folks do if they don't understand what they're looking at here as far as some of these releases from the many projects on Lake Marion and Moultrie, is these targeted flows out of the Jeffries, the Santee, all the different, can't remember them all offhand, projects. I mean, these are targeted flows to balance a whole host of stakeholders' interests, and all of them have given feedback into the FERC license. And in most cases, these set targeted flows are not minimum in-stream flows. And they're specified specifically within the FERC license, not minimum in-stream flows. But what I think we need to be careful about is, as just like with the other slides, folks can look at a slide like this and get a little bit confused about what we're talking about, and whether we somehow have like an MIF excursion or an inability to meet MIF, when that's not what the FERC license is saying, nor what these numbers are saying. This inability to meet targets that we target when there is sufficient supply. Those are just two, I'm all about framing management strategies around a goal of meeting targets, but we need to differentiate targets versus minimum in-stream flows, so they are two different things.
That's a good point.
That's a good point.
Well, Cooper River with the type of influence, you're never gonna see a consistent minimum in-stream flow, even for discharging. So,
Depends on what you're behind on that.
right,
You can't discharge enough to overcome the moon.
Just the Duke system, are there, lakes and dams licensed individually? Or is the Duke hydro system under one FERC license?
I think it's in a one for the whole 11
Thomas
system.
Hardy,
Yeah.
yeah, the whole development's one license.
I mean, they got 7 dams in it.
They've got 11 projects, I believe,
Yeah.
in North and South Carolina in the Catawba Basin. Okay, ready to move on? Okay. I think, Cam, this was strategic nodes because it sets up the next slide, which is where we're showing flow data, right? Which is table 5 in the memo.
Right. This is table 5 in the memo, looking at performance measures at all the strategic nodes. A lot of numbers in this table. We can kind of break it up by looking at moderate demand and high demand across different strategic nodes. Those would be in the next couple of slides. So this slide, it compares the current use scenario to the moderate demand scenario. And the middle section of the table is if we subtract the 2070 moderate demand scenario from the current use scenario, what is the difference in flow? And you can see a recurring theme. At a couple of these nodes, we don't see a significant difference in current use to 2070 moderate demand. We see, such as the inflow to Lake Marion node, we do see a slight decrease in the mean and median, but actually in the low flow, so the 10%, the fifth percentile flow, we actually see a slight increase in flow when we compare the current use to the 2070 moderate demand. And we also see like Santee 09 node, the same thing happening where maybe we see larger decreases in flow at the mean and median, but when we get to those low flow periods, a less impact to the flow in those periods.
And one of the things we mentioned before, the minimum flow that we see at this Santee 07, Tail Race Canal below Moultrie, we're always trying to maintain 4,500 there. The FERC license is a weekly average 4,500. We're doing a monthly time step, but the model's set up to always try to maintain that at the expense of everything else. And it shows that, yeah, we've got that in both scenarios. There's 2 CFS difference between moderate and current use here, but relatively it's 0% difference.
And you can see the same thing for the SNTO2 model, which is down at the Santee downstream of Lake Marion, where we're trying to hit that 600 always, but then we have that 2,400 to 1,200 target. We're always at least having 600 CFS flow there.
You do this one too. This is just the high demand scenario compared to current use, and
Sure.
Bottom part, you can see the percent differences.
And it's basically the same story as the 2070 moderate demand, but the impacts are a bit more severe. At the inflow to Lake Marion, we're seeing decrease in flow. As I mentioned before, the median flow is a larger decrease than if we're looking at the low flow periods. We'll kind of see that happening also for SNTO9. And we're still able at SNTO7, which is downstream of Lake Moultrie, still hitting that 4,500 CFS, and we're at SNTO2, also reaching the 600 CFS value.
Yeah.
So now we can look at the comparison of lake elevations for Lake Marion and also Lake Moultrie under these different scenarios. When we were setting up the model to run, we looked at a dead pool of 60 feet. And for each, here for Lake Marion, but also for Lake Moultrie, and how the flows were impacted, or the lake level was impacted, especially at lower periods. We can see that what we currently have modeled, we don't really see the lake dropping down to the dead pool for either the current use or the 2070 moderate demand scenario. But here recently, as in last week, we were talking with Santee Cooper and updating our understanding of where we should set the dead pool. And the conclusion we came to last week was that we should set the dead pool a little bit higher at 69.25. And we haven't reran the model with this updated understanding. But if we were to keep the dead pool at 69.25 with the current model run, we would see that we actually hit the dead pool at some points for both current use and 2070 moderate demand. Now, when we update the model, Lakes Moultrie and Marion will try to work together to balance each other out. So we're not sure what the impacts will look like with the updates.
The intent, and let me give a little more of the backstory, and Michael, you might be able to fill this in, is the drought contingency plan had a statement that said dead pool elevation basically 60, and then Michael sent us some more information that kind of contradicted that. So I said, oh, a little bit of a disconnect here. He talked to staff both at both regional water systems, I guess, and there was a lot of back and forth. It looked like reading through the email chain you forwarded to me. But there's some subtleties about where their intakes are located and how much they could actually withdraw. I don't know if you want to get into that.
Yeah, so the 60 is really, that's a product of dead pool for power generation. That's what kind of the main purpose of the drought contingency plan was initially. The water plants were added obviously after the lakes were built. And even in that 69.25, there's still a little bit of nuance as to exactly where I think that line needs to be, because we can still withdraw at the Lake Marion plant down a little bit lower with some modifications to operations. So I think we need to massage it a little bit still, but yeah, the bottom line is because the topography is so flat around here, our water systems aren't able to get their intakes very far down into the floor of the reservoirs. Because
You wouldn't have enough head to push turbines.
well, that too, but you would have to basically have a pipe so long to get out into the deeper parts of the reservoir that it becomes challenging from that perspective.
Deeper parts.
Right, exactly.
About 2 feet.
Right, yeah, you're running hundreds of feet to get back a couple of feet of depth.
And Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, part of this conversation too is likely around the idea that the contingency plan is gonna impact the amount of water you can release from all the different discharge points. And you don't want to wait until you're in an emergency condition across the two reservoirs to be like, hey, we're gonna change our discharge because it's a little late.
Right, yeah, and that's what the drought contingency plan lays out. I think part of what we've been working through on the modeling here recently is how to basically provide simplified reservoir operating rules that can work within the SWAM model. If we've got fairly complex triggers that we can implement because we've got time on a daily basis and we've got people monitoring it, but that's hard to basically replicate in the model. So I think that's part of the challenge.
Right.
That we've got ahead of us as well.
Exactly. So in the next week or two, and maybe even before the training, there's time, we're gonna adjust the dead pool elevation, and then we're gonna start to rerun the model. If we were to set the dead pool elevation at 69.25 for Marion, you'd see there would actually be shortages. Lake Marion Regional Water System wouldn't be able to get water at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times during the period of record. So that would be an actual shortage, but what we want to do is prioritize that and adjust the rules so that it's releasing less water. We're going to increase the frequency that we don't meet those in-stream flow targets, those target releases from Marion and Moultrie, but we're going to decrease and or eliminate the shortages that we're seeing here where it drops below 69.25 elevation. So that 20% is going to go up, from that table we see here, and this 8% is probably going to go up a little bit too. So it's kind of going to be a balancing act. What we're not going to reduce is the 4,500 release going to the Cooper River. Michael said that's the first priority to meet that. I don't know, Michael, if it gets really severe, would you still prioritize maintaining? Well, I think you would. You prioritize water levels in Moultrie and Marion, but sacrifice the 4,500 if you had to?
I think that's ultimately where we would have to get, would be talking with the Corps about reducing that. And obviously, that's not something that we would ever prefer to do, but at some point, if you can't maintain lake elevations, if it was a dramatic enough drought, that's what you would have to do.
That's not gonna come.
It has not. It has not. The 07 drought was really, at least in recent memory, the most severe that we've seen, and I think got down to 66 or 67 in both lakes, if I remember correctly.
I think Moultrie modified their intake structure in 2007 because
Yeah, they had to bring in thermal pumps to try and basically mitigate the filter head, the low production head that they had to work with for their raw water system. I was just trying to look back. The Lake Marion began commercial operation in 08, which would have been on the tail end of that drought. So I don't know that it's been tested under low lake elevations to the same extent that the Moultrie plant has.
Yes. Okay.
And Joe, I will add, though it's never happened, obviously our drought contingency plan covers what if it did happen. And in our drought plan, it talks about what if specific conductivity or salinity within Bushy Park starts to climb. The only reason it started to climb is because those 4,500 CFS releases for whatever reason aren't able to be maintained. So, we have Goose Creek Reservoir and we have Edisto source. We utilize Goose Creek Reservoir as a last resort, as a contingency, both for the industrial supply that uses it and for Charleston Water System. But it's not huge, but it's not a small impoundment, 500 plus acres, about 30,000 acre watershed. But the idea would be that we could utilize that contingency source. We could switch back to some Edisto, and we could, within our drought plan, curtail, again, if we reach some crazy scenario in the future, where we had and again, it would have to be a sustained inability to release, not momentary or even a couple of weeks. We'd have time, you see the salinity and specific conductivity start to climb. But a lot of it would be tied to what the demands are at that time, what happens with thermoelectric between now and that time. There's a lot of uncertainty, but our plan already covers that contingency if specific conductivity started to climb due to an inability to release a Kannapolis Dam. So we've already planned for that. Just
You get a drought of that magnitude, though, it's gonna affect the Eddystone as well.
absolutely, and that's why, you know, but one thing that Edisto's got going for it, and really Lake Marion and Moultrie do too, but let's say Lake Marion and Moultrie get to a low dead pool. A rain event, it's gonna take a while to build it back up, and the same way it took a while to drain it back down. One thing that even the withdrawal law covers, and if, again, we're not in the withdrawal law at this point, we're in the Drought Act at this point, so all this argument over the withdrawal law while we're in a drought is kind of interesting because the Drought Act supersedes the withdrawal law. But one thing that Edisto does, even in drought, is spike and flow because there's no retention in it. And so there's gonna be plenty of times, and there was during these 3 major droughts where the Edisto reaches good flows. It just doesn't stay there very long. And even within the Withdrawal Act, as long as the river system's back above MIF, in the case of Edisto, even during drought, had many times where we're well above MIF, we could rebuild Goose Creek Reservoir, we could pull from Edisto, and we could, with the flip of a switch our ratio back and forth. Ideally, we do the blend changes slowly. But my point is, when you have 3 sources, there is a lot more capability and flexibility and resiliency in that system. You're right, it's a statewide drought at this point that we're talking about.
One thing that we can do, which we've done in some of the other basins, is try to see the impacts of a more severe drought than we've witnessed in the past. And this is a scenario that we do where there's basins that have reservoirs like Marion and Moultrie. And like in the Saluda, for example, we repeated the 2008 drought. So we took the hydrology of 2008 and used it as the inflow time series for 3 straight repeating years, as a way to see, well, what if you had an extended 2008 drought? How would that impact lake levels? So we can run that scenario here and see if that's gonna, cause some of the problems we're just talking about. Okay. This next one is, what is this, Cam? This is high demand scenario, Moultrie, Marion, and hard to see the differences between these 2 scenarios. But you see a little further drop in the low levels, elevations for Marion from high demand compared to current use and moderate. And Cam, I'll let you take it back over on Moultrie.
It's same story for Moultrie. You can see that, if you base the dead pool on 60 feet, well, we don't hit the dead pool, but if we're looking a little bit higher, in the case of like Moultrie at 66 feet, we do hit the dead pool for the current use at 2 points, almost 3 points in time. And then we also see those, the dead pool start to lower in the moderate demand scenario for Lake Moultrie. When we look at the high demand, it'll lower even further still.
That's high demand.
Yes. And we just see the decreases increase to a greater extent.
Yeah. Okay, so that's quick review of the results. Before we get into discussion, any other questions about what you've heard?
I got one question. I mean, I thought we saw a net decrease in the total demand due to reduced thermoelectric, and yet you're showing increased or decreased dead pools. So how's that working?
So there's less flow coming in from the upstream basins, so that's impacting.
So they didn't have the same reductions in thermoelectric that your model?
No, there wasn't any closures of electric facilities that we had to assume. So they had increases in demands, whereas, because
A
of
lot
those
of the upstream major basins.
Yeah, that's what I attribute to, just lower inflows, especially the Catawba. I think it had more severe changes between the current moderate and high than the Saluda and Broad did. Which again, may just be a reflection of the Catawba's approach to demand estimates.
I'm sure they were conservative too.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully everybody's being conservative so that we can model the worst, but be ready for the worst, but hope for the best.
Right. Yep. Okay, so some considerations moving forward. you saw the list of 7 or so strategic nodes. Does anybody have any information or would like to see a node at any other point in the system so you can see the difference in flows between scenarios or within scenarios? No, okay. I don't know if you remember back to when we talked about definitions, and Scott introduced back in February the concept of a surface water condition. That's basically a minimum flow that we would establish as an RBC in a river that you don't want to go below. So we almost set it as like it's just a threshold where we say we always want to have 50 CFS in this part of the creek or river. And we don't want to drop below that to support in-stream flow or recreation or navigation or whatever we want to set. Or what?
Aquatic life.
Aquatic life, exactly. So that's something we want you to consider. Is there anywhere you want to set a surface water condition? And if you set a surface water condition, then we would run the model scenarios and we would say, okay, well, we're experiencing a shortage at this point because you set the condition as 50 CFS and 5% of the time we drop down to 40 CFS, just as an example. The other RBCs really haven't established surface water conditions. I think the Edisto talked about it the most, but we never really set one. Nobody else really had impetus to establish a surface water condition, so we kind of moved on.
Does DNR have any data at what elevation fish kills would occur?
Scott, do you have an answer to that? Did you hear the question?
I'd have to ask somebody at DNR. I don't know what data they have regarding that.
Yeah.
To me, that would be a controlling factor.
Yeah. And it gets complicated because I think it has to do with too the duration at the time you're at that low level, what the oxygen content is, the temperature, right?
The algal will
Yeah,
facilitate.
yeah. Cyanobacteria growth, become stagnant, could impact things. So yeah.
We can look into that.
It's just
Yeah, no,
curious.
that's a good question.
Yeah. So we already have trigger, or I don't want to call them minimum stream flows. I want to keep my technology or my terminology correct, but we've got target flows that we want to hit from releases. That's kind of a surface water condition, but it's a little different. I'm not hearing that anybody really wants to propose a surface water condition at any point in the system.
I think it's too much for what we're doing, too complicated. Maybe
Yeah.
another committee, another year.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah,
Probably have the data to back it up.
It's important.
right. In some of the other basins, when we've done the ecological flow relationship work to help with the USGS and Clemson, and we're not doing that here, but we've done them in others. They did have additional information at certain points that was based on a whole lot of fish and macroinvertebrate data and relationships to flow and duration of flow, magnitude of flow. So they had more information to consider potentially setting a surface water condition. But yeah, you don't have that same information. Cam?
John Grigo in the chat. Oh, he just raised his hand, so maybe he can
Yeah,
speak to it.
go ahead, John. Do you want to just speak up and say your comment?
Oh, yeah, I'll make a nod toward the complexity of this issue setting one, but I mean, I would note the portion of Cedar Creek that runs through Congaree National Park is the only outstanding national resource water in the state. And, you know, for recreational purposes, as well as for other purposes, I think that might be, one site you could explore a surface water condition. And I know there has been an issue with an upstream user abruptly changing the flow, and cases that left, a couple cases where it left Cedar Creek quite dry. So just something to think about.
Okay. And that's a good segue to the next question on the third bullet about establishing a reach of interest. A reach of interest is kind of an area where you might not be seeing a shortage, but there's reason that the RBC would be interested in that stretch, whether it be for navigation. And the one example I'll give is in the Saluda Basin, just below one of the small hydro facilities on the upper part of the Saluda River. There's a designated hydrologically impaired section, and that's the only hydrologically impaired section in the whole state. that's kind of considered, the Saluda RBC considered that a reach of interest, because at times there's not enough flow release to support canoeing and kayaking, basically. And the releases were kind of unscheduled, and it was causing some issues for folks that like to recreate basically downstream. So it achieved a hydrologic impairment designation, but that's kind of example of a reach of interest.
In the hierarchy of reasons, it seems to me recreation would be at the very bottom.
I guess it depends on your perspective, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think,
Well,
I mean, I appreciate saying, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, yeah, I would just say, I can understand that point too, but recreation's a big part of the outdoor. Recreation draws an awful lot of paddlers to Congaree National Park, and it's very, very popular there. And I mean, from my perspective, I'm much more interested in the health of the ecosystem there. But
Yeah.
The recreation industry's pretty big, not just on Cedar Creek, but on a lot of waters in South Carolina. So it's a higher priority than it
It's
might be.
below the ecology of
Yeah, I see what you did.
keeping things alive would be a whole lot more important
Than recreation.
than
Right?
people being able to paddle.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're basically saying, first, you want to protect public health, right? And then secondly, you want to try to leave as much in for ecological health, aquatic health. And then thirdly, recreation might be below those two, just because priority. I think the point you're making, right? Yeah, yeah. So, but John, your point's valid too. Recreation is a valid, very, very large economic driver and important to a lot of people. So,
Glenn Wallover, had a comment, said recreational opportunities also can be economically important to the state with tourism draw.
yeah, thanks, Gwen. Okay, then the last question, are there any other additional scenarios that you want to look at? And I mentioned one that we can do, which is a more severe drought. First thing we want to do is we want to adjust our dead pool, and we want to rerun the model, try to minimize or eliminate any shortages for water supply for regional water systems in Marion and Moultrie. Then we'll see what the impacts are to the frequency of time that we're not able to hit those triggers, or excuse me, those Marion and Moultrie diversion canal, rediversion canal flows. Beyond that, then we can do a kind of a synthetic drought scenario or multiple synthetic drought scenarios to see if a more severe drought would have impact. That's something that's easy to do, that I think we intend to do, if you're okay with that. Is there anything else that you want to see? Jason?
I mean, one thing I'd point out, and we saw this in the Edgewood Basin, I'm sure it was reflected in all the basins across South Carolina, because the 3 statewide multi-year droughts we had over the last 20 years affected the entire state. Maybe some areas worse than others. Like the drought record might be different depending on where you are in the state for those 3 drought. But one good thing is prior to 2000 or 1998-ish, the drought record was that 1950s drought. And boy, when you look at the hydrologic record around, over the past 80 years, whatever the stream flow gauges covered, it was kind of like, that was a horrible drought. It'll probably never happen again. It was a one-time thing. And the reality is we've had 3 major statewide multi-year droughts in the last 20 years. And they, in the scheme of major droughts, they were in relatively quick succession of one another. I mean, especially the first 2, well, I'd argue even the third, the groundwater hadn't 100% recovered before we were entering into another drought. And so in our SWAN modeling data is based off of that data. And so I'm all about modeling an Armageddon drought, but it's important to acknowledge that we've never had more stresses on minimum in-stream flow and supply than we've had in the last 20 years due to 3 real drought. So I'm all about modeling it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but if anybody argues we don't need to model it, or they're probably not gonna happen. They haven't looked at the last 20 years of stream flow data. We definitely need to plan for a drought within all the basins.
Okay.
And that would already be individual entities.
So the years you're referring to are with 2007.
Yeah, there was the start in 98, so then Brooke can correct me, but like 98 to 2002-ish, and then there was 2005 to 7, and then there was 2011 to 13, or something like that roughly.
Yes.
Even 15, which is
Yeah.
pretty bad.
And you can see it in the dips.
And there have been some flash droughts in the summer, like 19 and 22.
Yeah.
But those were brief.
Partial year versus,
Yeah.
the idea across a multi-year drought is you may, like the Eddystone, I mean, you may have flood events. You know, the river reaching flood levels within the drought period. That's the misnomer. People don't think it will. But even the tropical storm isn't gonna be a drought buster if you're going 2 months without rain in between your tropical storms. And it really does start to impact your swamp, your surface groundwater retention, your deeper aquifers, and just the whole supply chain for the water model gets stressed with a multi-year drought in ways in which you're not going to see in a 2, 3, 4 month drought, flash drought, or characterized as otherwise. And we really have, the data shows, and we're able to model that in a way which would not be possible if all we had was the 1950s drought to reflect on. So it's a good thing from the standpoint of we've got real data with real droughts.
Yeah.
Bad ones, multiple in a row.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so we'll look at a synthetic drought. We're gonna look at that permitted and registered scenario to the extent we can. It's a little unique because, we're getting flows from North Carolina and they don't have the same permit and registration system, but we can kind of make some assumptions there. So we'll come back next month with a permit and registered scenario, synthetic drought scenario. And then we may do some scenarios that help look at the impact of water management strategies, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But primarily like cumulative demand side reductions, and is it worth pushing for water efficiency and water conservation that might lower our demands by collectively basin wide by 5% or 10% for one sector or another sector or all sectors, and if we're able to achieve those percent reductions in future demands, what does that look like? Does it make us not meet those release targets for Marion and Moultrie to support aquatic life 5% of the time versus 10% of the time? I don't know, but that's what we use the models to help us determine that. But we'll talk about those additional scenarios that we could run to look at kind of cumulative impact of water management strategies, especially demand side strategies, after this afternoon or early afternoon. Any other scenarios, though, that you can think of now? And you might, after you poke around with the model next week, you might realize, oh, hey, what if we looked at this? Can we look at this? We can talk about that next week, too, if you're at the training session. Okay. Next step, we're going to continue to review the model and results. We're going to do some additional scenarios. We've got some fixes to make in those tables. We'll reissue the memo after we've redone some of the modeling, changed the dead pool, and had more time to kind of QA/QC it. We're going to adjust the reservoir rules. We're going to do that permit register scenario, and then we'll talk about water management strategies later. So we'll get back to this. Okay, let's take a break now. It's 10:45, is that right? Let's take about a 10-minute break. So if you're online, we're going to start up at 10:55 and talk about water management strategies a little bit, and then we'll break for lunch. But 10-minute break. Good, okay. Okay. We started talking about water management strategies at the July meeting, kind of did an overview of different strategies. So at least we started the discussion. What we want to accomplish today, and I recognize that you've only seen preliminary model results, right? So you're basing your selection of water management strategies on incomplete information to some extent, but I think you understand where we're going with the water modeling, right? We're not really seeing significant shortages, but we do have those targets that we want to try to maintain, and that in itself is a impetus to select some strategies or identify strategies that help us maintain those release targets at a greater frequency and avoid water supply shortages. We could run that more severe drought scenario and see that we can't meet those target releases and we can't meet water levels, and Lake Marion Regional Water System is going to be without water for certain periods under severe drought. I don't know, we'll see, but keep that in mind as we think about what strategies we want to recommend in our River Basin plan. Remember, what's in our River Basin plan? We've got a chapter 6 that kind of outlines potential strategies. I've already sent you a memo before the July meeting that summarizes both supply side and demand side strategies. Chapter 7 is where we select which strategies we want to promote in the River Basin plan, right? And that could be demand side strategies where we're looking for water efficiency or conservation or rate structures or low flow toilets or whatever it might be. And it could be supply side strategies where we're saying we need more reservoirs or we need more interconnections or we need better mix of conjunctive use, better mix of ground to surface water or something else. The goal today is to walk away with our list of strategies so that we can put together a draft of chapter 7 that you can react to. So that's what we're going to do in the next 2 hours is identify strategies. At the next meeting, we'll confirm that list, but we really only have 3 or 4 more meetings and we've got to get this done. Everybody good with that? Okay. I was going to break folks up into 2 groups and have an online group, but we're such a small group. I'd rather just do it as a small group. So we're gonna keep it, as one larger group, even though you're small. We're gonna keep it as a group discussion rather than small breakout groups, and that's easier to do when we've got a couple online attendees as well. We ran out of time to have this group discussion last time, but we started to talk about some of these questions. This is just to get your brain thinking and to recognize the many strategies that are already in place in the basin. And I want to do a quick brainstorming session to say, okay, what are some of the existing strategies in the basin, just to get you thinking? And what are some of the supply side strategies? Let's start with that. What do we already do on the supply side to provide water to all? Give me some examples. This should be easy.
Multiple sources or something.
Multiple sources. And what are those sources?
I mean, for Charleston water, it's, you know, 2 intakes in the Santee Basin and intake in that basin.
Yeah, and specifically there's reservoir sources, right? So we've got storage. That's a supply side strategy in itself, is storage. But we've got these large reservoirs that provide storage for surface water. And then for like golf courses and ag, we saw that the small impoundments are a strategy in itself.
And availability of groundwater.
Yeah, availability of groundwater is a strategy. Yeah, so tapping groundwater sources and then potentially in addition to surface water is a conjunctive use strategy. And that's been discussed in a lot of the coastal plain basins as an important strategy, especially where there's areas where there's both potential low stream flows and or capacity use areas, which is the whole coastal plain now, and not wanting to have significant cones of depression and large drawdowns. There's a balance that needs to occur potentially. I mean, Mount Pleasant's a good example of conjunctive use. They use both surface water and groundwater, and they rely on both, right? I mean, you kind of need both. You don't always need both, but you like to have both, right? That flexibility, that resilience.
Well, we're getting to the point where we can sustain on groundwater only, but it would be a reduced level of service. Right, so if we didn't have the 6 million from Charleston, we would have to reduce our pressure.
Yeah. Okay. What else on the supply side?
Increased storage.
Increasing storage, yeah.
Yeah, kind of like those compounds, but maybe bigger.
Yeah, so actually dredging, especially for smaller impoundments, is a supply side strategy because over time, over decades, you lose storage and you may need to dredge that storage to, gain that original amount of storage.
You had said something about you don't take anything in for rainwater. What about having some type of strategy for collecting rainwater?
Yeah, I mean, simple one would be, just rain barrels for your yard, which is a supply so that you're not using your own publicly provided water to irrigate your lawn. That's certainly
I'm just thinking about the massive amount of
water that comes out of the sky in certain events like now.
Yeah.
And it just heads on downstream.
Right. So, at a bigger scale, stormwater capture, and creating retention of stormwater for things like irrigation could be one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or surface water and well water in short supply, people use cisterns.
Okay.
To collect rainwater.
Yep.
What is a cistern exactly? How is it made?
It catches roof drainage, and basically it's a tank that holds rainwater. Gutters and downspouts go to it.
Gotcha.
Well, there can be above ground too.
Cistern?
Yeah, like there's a giant cistern at College Charleston, and there's cisterns at the old MRV facilities, and they set up.
Yeah.
Cold water.
Similar to the rain barrel program, just maybe on a larger scale.
Much larger.
Like the small Caribbean islands use a lot of cisterns. They capture rain on their roofs and then, because they just don't have a lot of area to build reservoirs, no streams, no groundwater necessarily.
And they have to figure out a way to get it out of there and use it.
Well, they don't have a water treatment plant. So, I mean, you're gonna dig a well, you're gonna have a cistern, and then power down there is 3 times what it costs here, so cistern is free. Whereas pumping out of the ground is very expensive.
What were you gonna say, Ken?
Grigo mentioned improvements in non-consumptive use, for example, the watery station cooling tower.
So, using water more efficiently for energy is what he's saying. So you have less consumption, more return. Yeah.
That's on the demand side, right?
That's more demand side, I'd say.
Help me understand our exercise here. These are existing strategies, so what's current?
Well, we're talking about both now. But my intent was to focus on what do we already do in the basin.
Okay,
Some of this we're not already doing.
right. Gotcha.
Well, I don't know how many cisterns there are, but we do have multiple intakes. There's likely probably dredging that's happened, whether we know about it or not. There's certainly small scale storage. People have rain barrels. So far we're okay, I think, for existing strategies. One of the existing strategies we already talked about is interbasin transfer. Charleston water brings water over from the Edisto. That's a strategy, just to build resiliency, or could be for other reasons. I always struggle whether to put recycled water programs in supply or demand side. You kind of consider them both. Could be both, yeah. I don't know, are there any examples of recycled water programs in the Santee Basin? Anybody can think of? No, there's some in the PD and there's some in the lower span of Salcahatchee. Hilton Head does it, Beaufort Jasper does it.
We're doing a small amount, like a pipe. I don't know if that's what we do.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm talking about. You're doing a small amount?
Small.
What's the application?
Baseball fields,
Baseball fields. Okay, well, there you go.
irrigation.
Right.
Use gray water on golf courses in some instances.
Yeah.
If you're close enough to treatment plant.
Yeah, so Hilton Head does that. They take the gray water or water from the wastewater plant and use it for golf courses, like a good number of them. You can't think of anything else around here though where that happens to.
I don't know too many people around here.
Is Cuba doing it?
Little bit.
Maybe, it's a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Island. Yeah,
Okay.
Kiawah Island.
They have a small like package plant.
It's like a very small facility where they use it for irrigation.
They have their own sewage treatment plant at Debbie. And so it's a secondary, not tertiary. But a lot of flows from that go to gray water. We run into a real problem, weather like we've been having.
Wild dude.
Okay.
So wild dudes.
There's another supply side strategy we're missing that Mount Pleasant does. What's that, Al?
There's a quiz.
Yes. The quiz of how well do you know your own system?
John Day is one.
Yes.
You get it from Charleston.
Yeah.
Does that count?
I think.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, that's an interconnection between utilities. That's a good one. But ASR was what I was thinking of, and that's what Alan said. So he passed the quiz.
What is ASR?
Alan, do you want to explain what y'all do?
Sure. So aquifer storage and recovery, it's we're taking potable water, so drinking water quality, you inject it into the ground. So think a large storage tank that's just cheaper than building one on the surface. You inject that water in the ground, it creates a bubble, and then you recover that bubble when you need to. Typically, this time of year, we're recovering, and then during the low demand period, we'll recharge.
Isn't that just a giant cistern
It's a giant system underground.
underground?
That's it.
Alan, where's that well located?
So we have four. One of them is not in production right now. So we have three that we're using. One's an RO3 plant, so in the middle of Mount Pleasant. New one is up in the north area, so it's really on the extremities of our system, but down 17. And then our, I'm missing one. Where's the other one? Where's our other one go? So RO3, a new one. Oh, and then at RO4, both in the north area. So
Okay.
the water plant across from the hospital.
How deep are you?
So the depths of them, gosh, if Tony's online, he could answer it exactly, but 250 to 500.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or what about demand side strategies? So this is strategies that lower demands, use water more efficiently. What are some that are existing in the basin already, or ones that at least may be promoted by water utilities to their customers, or industries or energy?
I think drought and contingency plans. I mean,
Yeah.
they are almost always, in the worst case scenario, gonna have some level of curtailment.
Yeah, good example, right? Yep. And we talked about water loss control programs, right? Where utilities or others that maintain distribution systems find leaks, fix leaks. Alicia's not here, but I mean, Charleston and Mount Pleasant probably do annual audits, right? Yeah, and you do leak detection and you use smart meters or meters at least to identify where those leaks are. So that's a demand side strategy to minimize water loss, reduce non-revenue water. Remember when we had our drought discussion, we talked about rate structures, different types of rate structures. That's a demand side strategy. You have like a drought surcharge.
Where if you get in a drought and use so much, you pay a penalty.
Yeah.
But you're talking about,
Those are ineffective.
you're talking about a different rate structure all the time, not just a contingency.
Yeah, before we talk more about like drought surcharges, now we're kind of more talking about incentivizing less or disincentivizing high water use. So a rate structure that gets more expensive the more you use.
So we do have an increase in block structure.
Kind of like electricity.
Yeah, so Mount Pleasant has an increasing block structure then. But that is a demand side strategy. What about just like public education? Did Charleston or Mount Pleasant do any of that?
We do. We've got a public information officer that does a really good job. We actually have two different people dedicated to that role that are managing social media posts and getting with schools to do education. And that's going to include everything from the water cycle and basic science to, put your car in the grass to water it, to wash it and things like that. So it really does encompass a lot of different things. And we cover both wastewater and drinking water topics with this kids. We also have what we call a Citizens Academy initiative, which is actually about to start, where we send about 30, 40 volunteers in the community. We call them kind of the voices of the community. A lot of times they'll be realtors or HOA members and such, people that are a little more active socially, to go through what we call Citizens Academy, which is once a week for about a month and a half, where we take them through the life cycle of our source water, drinking water, distribution, collection, wastewater cycle, and help them better understand the nuances of our operations, which we think helps create advocates for us to better understand the complexities of what we do to provide these services. And it's been great. We've done a couple of years now. It's called lay audience for a reason. And I have to remember what I knew before I started Charleston Water, which was just about nothing. I was clueless. And so obviously they're not ready to be a licensed operator by the end of this, but they really do come a long way. They ask a lot of really good questions. It's a really good win-win for them and us through the process. And it is a huge investment in time and resources to do it, but it's paid dividends when they are jumping on social media in response to people's posts, educating other keyboard warriors about different things. And it's like, wow, you know what, you got to give people an opportunity to get educated, to understand things better. They still may have concerns. There still needs to be healthy conversation around these issues, but a lot of the keyboard warrior going on is by people that have no clue. And so it is on us to help educate the lay audience about the challenges of providing water services so that through the whole life cycle of water.
It's been supplanted a great deal by social media, but one tool that a lot of our clients have used over the years were flyer in the water bill. It's just a, did you know?
Yeah.
And it's just a little information thing, and it's written on the third grade level. And it's amazing the amount of response, for example, City of Myrtle Beach gets questions and that sort of thing just from the flyer.
You've got educated water influencers.
Yeah,
You're influencers.
and you should be on Citizens Academy next year. You should go.
I would love to do that. I just think to Mike's point earlier, what, we just don't know what we don't know. It's frightening. It can be overwhelming,
It is a rule.
what you don't know,
Yeah.
which can be good, I guess. I don't know.
Golf courses, talked about something that golf courses do to use water more efficiently last month.
Oh, you just cutting back. Yeah, I kind of on your drought plans, your contingency plans, either using wetting agents,
Yeah.
so you don't use as much water, or changing your height, so you don't have to do the water, or just let it start to go dormant. You know, I mean, it's not like we're harvesting grass roots. They're just playing on it. So it's not like crops, you know, food crops, and things like that.
Irrigation systems are much better today than they were 20, 30 years ago too. Of course, it costs a fortune to replace an irrigation system, but not necessarily the heads or the monitoring aspects of it. So
Right.
all
Moisture
the things
sensor.
we deal with have gone back to taking a look at that.
John Grigo mentioned in the chat improvements in agricultural irrigation. And then he also mentioned stormwater methods that slow runoff and improve recharge, water quality buffers, bioswales, pervious surfaces, rain gardens, etc.
Yeah, all good examples. Yeah.
And I just add around the public information component of it, I mean, we led a watershed-based plan on 212-digit hucks around Bushy Park Reservoir, which really is water quality driven studies. And it has the public information component of it. And then we were cooperative on a watershed-based plan on that stuff and are helping to get a Goose Creek Reservoir watershed-based plan over the finish line. And so it's these kinds of efforts that you can continue to educate the public, and you really try to get at both water quantity issues and water quality, both on the land and the water interface. And it's a lot of science. It just takes a lot of effort.
Okay.
I don't know if it's getting too specific or not, but like drip irrigation systems, so it's water use.
Yeah.
I mean, you can conserve a lot of water.
Precision and high efficiency irrigation type systems. Yeah.
You don't get evaporation using that like you do.
Yeah, we'll get to it later, since we don't have a lot of ag representatives here. There's a whole list of things we'll talk about that make sense, and hearing from all the other RBCs, and the ag representatives on the other RBCs are already pretty widespread across the state, especially in the coastal area where a lot of ag occurs. We'll save that for a little bit later. Okay, let's go on to the next one. There we go. Effectiveness strategies, just a real short conversation here, but do you all see any of these strategies that are already in place as being more effective than others? And I'll just like ASR. I mean, you like your ASR system. It seems to be pretty effective, working well. Yeah, okay. And I'll bring the useful tool. I know like Orangeburg has an ASR well, but because of the lithology there and other factors, it doesn't work as well. In fact, I think they're kind of not using it very frequently because they're having a harder time putting it in and pulling it out. And it's related to just the formation, water quality
Or
considerations.
related to the water chemistry and the
Yeah.
mismatch of the water chemistry. Dunk it up.
Can gunk it up.
Left, for lack of a better term.
So it doesn't always work, but in this case, yours works.
Or there's not, you can't get enough out, and so then it's not worth putting it in. It's, you're not, your yield isn't what you would expect. And I thought y'all had some issues with that for a while, but you improved it, obviously.
Exactly, and there's development issues and efficiencies of running them that you, it's not as easy as just putting it in and pulling it out.
Yeah.
To it and then.
Yes.
I think that's important to know.
Yeah, John, I don't know when's the right time. I was trying to figure out these, existing strategies, or are we talking about future strategies? But I feel like we need to at least have reuse up here. Certainly from the utility side, that's important to me. ASR is similar to that, so ASR today in our state, you have to inject potable water quality. So you can't inject anything that's not already drinking water. And I feel like we're missing the boat on treated effluent.
Yeah.
So where do you fit that in?
So I would put it here. We can add it as part of this slide, this discussion, and select that as one of our strategies going forward.
In the general public, to digest the fact that they're drinking reused water is a hurdle that we've all got to overcome.
Yeah, that would be down the road. I think we want to take baby steps with
But
reuse.
still,
But yeah,
Well, even for us, and I don't disagree with you, I think our community is more accepting than probably most in South Carolina. And I would say that our community is even ready for that discussion. But we could inject treated effluent to preserve the water that we do have. So if there's saltwater intrusion issues, if you have groundwater issues with saltwater intrusion.
I'll give you an example of where it doesn't work for them. Let's just say Myrtle Beach decided to use, to reuse water. Virginia Beach, our tourism competitors who use pristine treated water will use that as a tool against people not, really want to drink reused water in Myrtle Beach.
Not very far from Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads, they are already.
They have to.
They are already.
They already do it.
So I think that message, and I would argue that the Virginia Beach crowd would probably be more educated and open to it.
But I'm talking about perception. Their Chamber of Commerce will use that as a tool against tourism to Charleston and Myrtle Beach. Come here, we've got pristine water. That's just one example, but
Yeah, I would agree, Myrtle Beach is probably not our target to start with.
no. While it probably should be.
What other strategies do you think are especially effective? I mean, I know it's hard to relatively decide which ones are more effective than others, but anything jump out that, yeah, we need to keep doing more of this?
I mean, if there's a place we're on this, just continue to maintain multiple sources. I mean, one thing that has been because we've had other sources throughout history, Charleston Water has. And anytime we move to a more sustainable due to drought or water quality source, there's always that argument about, do you maintain the prior source? Do you maintain the permit on it? Do you maintain the infrastructure and all this? And we made a decision relatively early in our long history to maintain our ability to utilize the three sources, and it has paid dividends. And so I would just say, whether you've got conjunctive and groundwater and surface water and wholesale, or you have multiple wholesale connections between distribution, just every bit of contingency and resilience that you can develop into the system, even though there's an argument, how often are you going to use it? When you need it, even if it was only once in 10 years. And so I just think that it's really important to, in our case, Charleston Waters to continue to maintain multiple sources, but for all entities, conversations, just to develop as much resiliency into your supply as possible, and then maintain that resiliency. Don't let a good 5 or 10 years water quantity and plenty convince you that it was wasted resources. There's always going to have to be a feasibility argument, but.
Okay. For the well system versus surface water treatment. A lot of communities continue to exercise their wells, even though they're getting their water from surface water.
Yeah.
The downside to that is if you've ever actually used the water from the wells, you get reverse flow in pipes, you get different water chemistry. People's hot water heaters start blowing up on them. There are some downsides to that, but in an emergency, it's a good thing to have.
I think from a reservoir management perspective, we're trying to lean into AI and some of the other tools that are becoming available technologically to make sure we're optimizing how we're using the water that's available to us.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's still in development, so I
Right.
don't know that I can say it's necessarily proven to be more effective, but I do have hopes that it's gonna help us at least, yes, maybe more so on the high flow side. Maybe avoid some spill operations we've had to have in the past,
Mhm.
which in the long term could help the storage.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Just making smarter operational decisions.
Do you have
using
elevated
technology.
tanks in your system, or is it all just pumps?
We do have elevated tanks.
That's something that I've noticed communities don't use as much anymore. First of all, because they're expensive, but, we call them rubber bands, but a lot of municipalities prefer online pumps to keep the water pressure up instead of using elevated tanks. The downside is you don't have near the fire prevention.
Yeah.
And the cost significant. Oh, but it's, instead of capital cost, building a tank, you've got O&M costs of power.
Right. Well, Jason just gave us a good example before the meeting. Charleston relying on their storage to get by when they had a big main
Yeah, so-
break.
So Mike, to your point, we do both. We have about 2,000 miles of pipes in the Tri-County area from the one plant. It is a lot of water. And, we maintain a relatively high, pressure. That gives us a little more leeway too, to go to low pressures when we need to. But we have 5 elevated storage tanks and, we have either 2 or 3 booster stations, 2, most of them located at some of the tanks. And then in addition to those 5 elevated tanks, we have 2 clear wells on the plant with treated water, it just needs to be CT or contact time. But, all that supply, though it's not days and days and days of supply, it helps peak shave demand, but also it helps manage an emergency. So it buys us time when we have a big main break or some supply issue to troubleshoot the issue and also communicate to our wholesale customers that we need them to go to their conjunctive or contingency supplies for short periods of time. It just buys us time, helps us maintain pressure so we don't unboil water alerts. It's a good thing to have.
Yeah.
And the old rule of thumb was you had a day's supply of water in the air. And I don't know of any community that does that anymore.
Hard to do.
Yeah.
So I want, that's expensive and it's funny communities I have. So I had one elevated tank, nobody wanted me to take. Front page is paid, long page is paid. And then you try to build a tank, nobody wants to see a tank.
Not in my backyard.
Not, yeah, I know.
You talking about that water tower? I moved to Mount Pleasant in 1989. That one water tower.
Yeah.
Cute one. That
The cute one.
It's so cute.
I turned it into a swing.
You do?
Got a replica down in New Park. I think it's great.
But they're expensive. It's much cheaper to put it in the ground. That ASR, the volume, is just, I can put a lot of water in the ground. 100 million gallons compared to a large elevated tank is 1 million gallons. I mean, that's true.
I've always wanted to do 1-2 million gallon composite tank and then put an EMS station in the bottom of it because the pillar's big enough where you could house multiple things in it. None of my clients want to build, because it's what is it, $5 a gallon to build a tank now?
Yeah, I don't even know the latest, but our ground storage tank is for 2 million. It's a huge ground storage. And you get that up in the air, it's massive.
It took us 600,000 to refurbish an old tank a couple of years ago.
Oh, painting them's not cheap.
Yeah, but I will say, just having that storage capability for the systems that can do it is critical. But then too, you now have bulk supply that you have to recirculate on a regular basis, or you have stagnated water and water quality issues. So we purposefully drain down ours every single day, a certain percent, in order to make sure that the water stays cycled. But I'm just saying there's a maintenance component to it in addition to the financial component to it, which all goes into the feasibility. And for a small water system, the feasibility hurdles might just be too much.
Okay.
John mentioned studies you provided on household conservation showed drops in consumption that persisted, though they do level out and appear hard to improve upon at some point.
Yep, that's a good point, right. It's still unknown if we, push household residential conservation, low flow toilets, shower heads, things like that, how much more there is to gain. How can we lower that per capita demand? Maybe not a lot, but curious out. Okay, let's go to the next slide. You done typing, Cam?
We're just gonna put the low.
Okay. Okay. We kind of talked about this. Can existing strategies be expanded? I don't know, like, would you ever do an expansion of your ASR program?
Just completely.
Just did one,
And
okay,
online, hopefully by next summer.
okay, and like in the Hilton Head area, I know Pete's doing a second ASR well right now, so they're expanding that strategy. Alan, you said that reuse, there's certainly opportunities to expand reuse. Maybe not necessarily to direct potable reuse, but along those lines to just golf course irrigation or parks or using it as a barrier wall, which is what they want to do in Hilton Head Island to prevent saltwater intrusion. Different over in that basin than it is here, but there's a lot of different potential reasons why water reuse may gain traction, may be a more needed tool in our toolbox of strategies.
They're gonna have to look at the regulations that, not DEC now, DHS has got regarding that.
DES, yeah.
Because you've gotta have certain setbacks from fairways for housing or anything like that if you're using rail. So you've got buffer zones and all that you've got to obey.
I'm not sure if that's the case in Hilton Head or not, where they use water that's coming from their treatment plants. If they don't consider that gray water, it's.
They may be using effluent though, but I don't know.
Yeah, they do tertiary treated water, which.
Yeah.
We use effluent, and it's just time of day considerations for us.
Time of day, okay. Yeah. But you're right, to do other things like inject it into the ground, like Alan suggested, there does need to be a reuse act and like I can't remember if we talked about it in this RBC, but I think we have the, what's it called? The committee that,
Water SC.
Water SC, no, not Water SC, the Water Reuse Committee, South Carolina.
Oh, yeah, water reuse.
Yeah, Water Reuse South Carolina has worked with DES to kind of put together a draft, regulation, or is it law or
It's a statute.
statute?
Yeah, I think they did our folks looked at whether it was best to create a new statute or try to touch every statute regulation that you would have to change to allow the various types of water reuse. I think we'd like to see the finished product of that and start a discussion with water reuse and water SC and kind of see where we need to go.
How does that work legally? A statute can remain a statute unless it's challenged. Is that the way that works?
Unless a bill is introduced to change the statute is the way I understand it.
Okay, I'm just curious because.
I mean, sure, statutes can be challenged and litigated on various matters, but to adjust the statute, you need to have somebody introduce a bill and then that goes through the legislative process.
Any other strategies that jump out that could be expanded or should be expanded in the basin, demand or supply side?
But Joe, I guess just to touch on it, I think to me, as a representative on this RBC, it's very important to have reuse, right? Treated effluent as a source water or as a beneficial product. That's important to me. I think the water reuse of SC is pushing that. And so that's gonna make it up to water SC. Joe, I feel like the agency has talked about it and understands some of the burdens that our state has to deal with, and whether it's a single statute, multiple, issues, I get that. I feel like it's a good time to have a discussion in our state, so I think it's important that we include that in the Santee RBC recommendations so that it's heard. We're hearing it from multiple sources that we need to consider that.
Okay.
So I think that's what's important to me.
Yeah. At the retreat, there was discussion around water reuse too, and a lot of stakeholders on that committee saying the same thing that you were. So,
So Alan, you feel like this bullet contains what you're saying, good enough?
You know, Jason, probably, I would strengthen it any way we can. And I struggle with, we traditionally call a wastewater treatment plant wastewater. And that's just been, sewer and cool to call them a wastewater treatment plant. The sewer sounds gross. Wastewater is problematic in my mind because it's not waste. Don't know the right terminology to treat it effluent. Maybe that's more palatable.
Well, and can I just say from a layperson standpoint, I don't know the difference between gray water and effluent and wastewater.
Right.
Like, I don't know if we need to outline that.
And maybe water reuse is the right word, right? We just need to make sure that somehow either in the statute or our recommendations that water reuse is considered as source water in South Carolina.
It definitely needs to be wordsmithed.
And when is water reuse and recycling different? Like, what is water recycling versus water reuse? Like, is there a
yeah.
differentiation?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. We got into a lengthy debate in the lower Savannah-Salkehatchie around terminology, whether it should be called recycled water programs or water reclamation or water reuse. And what
Recycling is a very sexy word. People love to recycle.
yeah.
Let's call it water recycling.
Right, but there were some that were opposed to the term water recycling because they felt like that was a marketing tool to make it more palatable. And there was concerns about that.
Yeah, what's wrong with that? But there could be something wrong with it, right? What were the naysayers saying?
Well, the education component that, Mike touches on Myrtle Beach, and I think, we all understand this, but it's all recycled water. And I think
At the end of the day, you're right.
it's all
Right.
recycled water. Every drop in this lake out here, it's recycled water. And,
Okay.
It's an education struggle that we have to get over, but I agree with you.
Yeah.
You're not drinking water that hasn't already been consumed by somebody somewhere sometime.
Right, or come out of someone's bladder. Yeah, there's that too.
So in the lower Savannah-Salkehatchie, we ended up relying on water reuse, National Society definitions for recycled water versus reclaimed water. And if I tried to tell you the difference right now, I would hack it up. So we will use the same definitions in our chapters, and we actually define them so people understand what they are. But we most consistently use the term, I think, recycled water programs as a kind of a catch-all.
Uh-huh.
But in some instances, we did use reuse or reclaimed water when it's getting specific about, it's like whether, I can't think, it was like before, are you talking about before you've actually used it or not was the definition, but I'll have to look. And I don't want to rehash that whole conversation because it took like more than a meeting. There's a lot of strong opinions on it and we settled it to everybody's satisfaction.
So if we used what they came up with, that would save us 2 meetings time, and we're already short.
Yeah. Well, there were some pretty passionate folks there that didn't really like one of the terms and they were sticking to their guns and we kind of found the median, a way that everybody's happy.
I guess my only is that, the state water plan it's going to take a while, right? We're a long ways from seeing action from what this group does. But I think just getting the words out there and hearing it from multiple points of view, and we can embed it in the state water plan, that's a huge win.
I think the more basins that bring it up, make a recommendation out of it, the stronger it is certainly. And it's something that seems to be gaining some momentum.
Yeah.
Are there any people in the legislature that are champions of this, that understand it?
We're trying to find them.
I think that's probably the next step is to see strategically what the best way to approach it is, working with the water reuse South Carolina chapter, and then start looking at strategies to get somebody to champion it.
Which kind of politician do we need? Like state house, Congress,
You need
House,
somebody in the
Senate,
Senate, somebody in the House.
Senate, and House? Okay. Got it.
And likely to be more utilized along the coast of South Carolina initially.
Yep.
So I think those located that represent those areas would make sense.
But the driver for it in the coast has been difficulty in discharging the water.
Right.
So, they can't find permitted locations to be able to discharge wastewater, treated wastewater. So it's easier if you can reuse it and not have to go through that
Right.
permitting process.
Either they've reached their similar capacity, or they're in an outstanding resource receiving stream, so they're challenged in finding alternative ways to treat with their wastewater, so it makes sense to try to reuse it.
For example, Grand Strand started pumping their effluent into a Carolina Bay. And it was a huge success for about 7 or 8 years until the ammonia content got so high that it started killing all the vegetation. So it's, the technology is not there to completely clean it up. Well, it is to completely clean it up, but discharge it in a place like, you said, like Myrtle Beach, where we have very few places to let it go. You sure don't want it to go in the surf. You don't want to go at the intercoastal waterway because it's already been on the EPA's 303D list. So you've got limited places to put it. Grand Strand, for example, they've got hundreds of acres of turf farm.
Yeah.
They sprayed on the turf farm.
Okay, let's go to the next one and then we're gonna, I think, break for lunch. Let's see, next one is. Ken, can you advance it?
Yeah.
There we go. Oops, ignore Lower Savannah, Salkehatchie. I was reusing some slides and we kind of already actually talked about this. We just talked about what could we expand existing strategies. So let's skip past that. Next slide.
Not trying to take us back a slide, but I think about, the big player on your water budget was electricity, right? That was what made the difference between today and 2070.
Just because of plant closures.
So the plant closures, and I think we can all get our head around that we're gonna need more electricity in our state. And electricity and water are tied together, right? So we all agree to that. And maybe Michael, you can answer this, but to me, that's a huge component on all of our future upcoming, we're talking about public water supplies, mainly with ASRs, which may just be a drop in the bucket compared to energy generation. And so what do we think is best for our state? Should the RBC be making any kind of recommendations on, what type of energy, what's going to be the energy source of the future? Not that we can influence that, but to me, isn't that the elephant in the room, right? And where are we going to get our state? I heard that in 2035, we're going to need 50% more power than we have.
I'm just looking right there. Everything we buy that's got something that plugs into the wall on it adds to the use. And then you have the left who wants everything, all electric cars. Nobody said a word about who's going to upgrade the transmission system, who's going to build the plants to provide that electricity, because while wind and solar is a piece of the puzzle, it ain't the whole toolbox. So again, I think smaller nuclear plants are probably going to be the answer to that. But the technology and the permitting and all those elements, we're going to run into a problem before we have a solution.
Well, at our September meeting, we're going to try to wrap up, I think it'll be September, our recommendations related to policy. And what you just proposed, I think, is kind of a policy recommendation. Do we want to make a recommendation about dwindling supplies, basically? Do we not want to try to entice AI server farms because of the potential high water use? Or do we want to invest in technologies and support technologies that minimize high water use industries? Or I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, but you know what I'm saying? Be thinking about if you want to propose a policy type recommendation.
I would just think that is so important, certainly for this basin, right? It's the power generation basin. That's why we have the lakes. I would think that this basin, that's a very important discussion to have. What does it look like? What are the strategies that, I don't know that nuclear uses less water. I'm not sure. I think they're all very hungry for water.
Yeah, I think that's generally true. I don't know that the consumptive use for any future technology is necessarily going to be higher than the existing power resources that are on the system now. So I don't, and shooting dark, maybe, I don't see surface water limitations being the biggest hurdle for new generating resources to come online. It's more beneficial than some of the other environmental factors that we have to deal with to get those up and running.
And what's the time frame?
Yeah, it just depends on what the resource is. If it's a natural gas plant, that could be 5 to 7 years.
Is that the plan for the one that y'all are partnering with?
Candidates, yeah.
Yeah,
It is.
I just wish they'd built the damn thing in Florence instead of where they're building. Because that's the central you lake, and you already got the land.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, I guess my only observation is I feel like we're not talking about the energy consumption. And we're making these recommendations that are important. But we might be overlooking the bigger picture.
But to John's point, maybe under policy, we make sure we bring up that,
Yeah.
because it needs to be solved, but in as much as it's policy issue, probably more than anything.
Speaking strictly just for myself, like I'd love to see more nuclear. I think it's about the only solution that checks all the boxes from an environmental perspective while also still providing baseload power to keep count on. Because the issue with renewables right now is until you have feasible battery storage, you can't really offset traditional generating resources by building a solar farm. Because you can't count on that solar farm 100% of the time.
The last 2 weeks, we've got on them at all.
Right.
But it's a small modular reactors, one of those reactors that might reference that I've heard they can get, or a submarine, I've heard they can get even smaller and that they can't the solution that you distribute.
It's the regulatory side of it. The beauty of the military doing it is they're not regulating them. They build a nuclear plant for an aircraft carrier or submarine. The NRC is not looking at that. They're doing it on their own. The problem is when you start building things for public consumption, then you run into all of those other things. So your scale goes up. You build a much bigger plan to overcome that. So got to get a handle on regulation in order for nuclear power to be effective in America.
Okay.
Maybe under the current administration that'll happen, but I doubt it because current administration is only going to be there for 3.5 more years. So, and it takes forever to get anything through the House and Senate.
And there was Biden, the 600 plan, is that the truth about?
It's a possibility. I'm not
$1 billion
privy
hole
to-
in the ground.
I'm not privy to any of the, post review stuff that's going on, but I would love to see something happen.
They got to figure out what they built first. Because they didn't build it in accordance with the plans.
When we're finished. So,
Now,
All right. I'm sorry,
Okay,
I just feel
that's
like-
okay. No. So
huge scale, huge cost, huge error. Small scale. You don't have those problems.
before we start this next section, which just a little bit of discussion about kind of uncertainties and how those might color what strategies we want to identify and put in our plan. Let's break lunch. Lunch is here, right? Yeah.
Oh, lunch is here.
Yeah, it's past 11:45. Online folks, we're gonna try to get our lunch and start talking again, maybe 12 o'clock or 12:05 at the latest. So give you a little bit of break if you're online and listening in. But we're gonna try to get our lunch, bring it back and continue the discussion in about 15 or 20 minutes.
Lift the roofs off themselves.
Are we doing buckets today? Because I wore my chartreuse top
Oh, you did?
again,
Yeah.
another one. I'm gonna have to buy more because
Yeah.
we've got more meetings.
No, we're not bucketing anything. We're either deciding or saying no, yes or no,
Yay or nay?
yay or nay. I mean, you could green and red bucket if you want, but
But
Yeah.
we're not gonna do the yellow. All right, fine.
Next time.
Next, time. I'll have to get more chartreuse
Not
top.
go today.
okay, we good, Kim? All right, so in the last 55 minutes today, we want to basically identify our list of water management strategies and kind of to help guide through that discussion. Keep a couple things in mind. One is that water users all have different financial and technical resources. So we might identify a strategy that could work for 20% of the water users very well, but the other 80, it doesn't apply necessarily. So think broadly when we're identifying these strategies. We're putting together a toolbox of strategies to recommend. Some of those tools in the toolbox might not work well for certain folks. They don't have the money to implement it, or they don't have the resources to implement it, or it's just not effective. So keep that in mind. On the same token, not every strategy is applicable to every water user. We're going to go through a quick exercise to talk about uncertainty. When you select these strategies, you got to keep future uncertainty in mind. And that's one reason we're going to kind of develop, or at least think about, kind of an adaptive management strategy and identify strategies that might not be needed now, but could be needed 20 or 30 years from now. Conditions change beyond our planning assumption. And kind of an example of that is this typical kind of flow chart that you might see if you've ever looked at adaptive management plans, where you implement what's called no regret actions. Those are actions that make sense now, will make sense in the future, and they help mitigate a basic risk, right? But then as time goes, you hit these different risk triggers, right? And they could be different things, like, could be tied to population or water quality issues or whatever. And they might make you stay the course and not implement new strategies, or take action and implement some type of strategy. And that keeps occurring as you move through time. You get different triggers and you have to decide, we want to stay the course, or do we want to take action and implement a strategy? And it's just kind of a way of thinking of how you adapt to the future, given uncertain and changing conditions. So what are some of the uncertainties that could impact how we do planning, and whether we implement a strategy or whether we need to implement a strategy or not? There's a whole lot of different uncertainties, but what are some that come to mind that are perhaps some of the bigger uncertainties?
A recurrence in the Charleston 1886 earthquake, which would take out the North Santee Dam.
Like everything on that.
Wow, that's a good one. Yeah.
It's actually, Santee Cooper, I think, I may stand corrected, is the only one.
I thought you were like, good
Oh,
job.
no.
It's the only licensed project with a known to be unsafe dam.
Okay, now I'm worried.
I know.
No, you don't work.
One thing I would add to Alan's point is just uncertainty around power generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely uncertainty.
So.
Kind of-
Expound upon that.
Well, yeah, both on the demand of power and the supply of power. We don't know whether there's going to be enough supply, what the demand is going to be like, whether AI data centers or some other technology is going to significantly change the demand over the next couple decades.
I guess as Michael would probably not prefer that it say future power generation, because you're gonna be, like me, I'm gonna meet the demand, right? I'm gonna find a way to meet the demand. I would never tell our residents that we're not gonna be able to meet your demand.
No, we have to.
However, if I have to.
Yeah.
However, I think what we're really saying as an RBC is we are concerned about the demand, quantity of demand is concerning to us, because that's tied to the quantity of water, right? But maybe there's a better way to word that, where it's, the demand is the concern, not the ability to meet it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Growth in general,
Yeah.
like unsustainable growth in the state. It's
Alright.
called.
Didn't I see on the news the other night that AMX was gonna open up another pipeline? When we built Cross 2, which was the first one, it was built for AMX.
Yeah.
And they went out of business for how many years?
A decade at least.
So the changes in the economy because of the tariffs, that's the reason the AMX is opening up its pipeline. But they're a huge consumer of electricity.
I think the demand I'm concerned about it is some of it would just be residential growth, but I'm concerned about it just from the technology standpoint. It's the technology / AI demands.
Yeah. What else? What other uncertainties?
I think. But from climate perspective, you're seeing no volatility
Yeah.
in rainfall. The totals might not be, but it's coming in more distinct events much more quickly, and then those
Yes.
periods where you don't get as much inflow or rainfall.
Exactly, yeah.
So that creates challenges.
Yeah. Sometimes we've called it hydrologic variability. That's a way to avoid the word climate change. In certain states that don't like to talk about climate change necessarily, not that this is one, but that exactly the hydrologic variability, the change in when you see rain and the frequency, intensity, and duration of it is certainly one that's pretty high on the list.
It's also just to the point, which gets to this topic, the climatological changes that nobody wants to talk about. But so much of it is, when you look at very large timelines, is a data resolution issue, in stats. But I just feel like part of it is that we do not fully understand variation in the data because we have such a short data set with resolution sufficient to see the variability. We can look at, tropical hurricane events, tropical storms, and say Hugo was the worst we could ever expect, and we saw that one storm in 80 years. But in reality, if we had 500 years of that kind of resolution data, there might be a Hugo every 50 years, and we just don't know yet. And so I think you've got to understand the variability due to increased data resolution. Like, are we getting more variation? Or are we just now monitoring and seeing that variation? And that's something that you rarely see talked about around the political debate around climate change, but it is pertinent to planning, because regardless of whether it's climate change or something else, we are likely not got full visibility on the variability of these things, precipitation and tropical storm. And we need to plan for this variability rather than smoke screen and mirrors on who to blame for this variability. That part of it, but the reality is we need to plan for these extreme events.
Yeah. I think another thing too, not just hydrologic variability, but, we heard from Hope when she did her climate talk that South Carolina temperature has increased 1 degree Celsius, I think, over the last 90, 100 years, I believe. And that was in comparison to, I think, a global average of about 2 degrees Celsius. But as we look, 50, 100 years into the future, pretty much every climate model, while they might not disagree on rainfall, says we're going to be getting warmer, right? So what happens when we get warmer? We lose more to evaporation. In this basin, we have 2 large reservoirs with a lot of surface area that would lose more water for every degree that goes up, So that to me, that's an uncertainty. The Catawba Wateree Basin likes to point out that they lose more water to evaporation in their 11 reservoirs than they have in daily use, basically, from all sources. So they're losing more water to evaporation than they are withdrawing water. I don't, you might the mass balance.
That seems,
How do you measure?
that seems hard to believe.
Yeah, that's true.
How do you measure that?
How do you measure evaporation? You can do like pan evaporation studies, where you basically just fill up water in a pan and measure changes over the rate of time and take into account wind and humidity and other factors and basically come up with those rates. And I mean, you guys have water budget models, simple spreadsheets that you calculate evaporation, assuming as part of your daily operations of your reservoirs, right?
I couldn't tell you what it was offhand, but it is substantial.
Right.
Because to your point, they're shallow, they're very wide bodies of water. There's high, high sun load on all the reservoirs that they have during summertime, and so, it's a substantial part of it.
Because for shallow too, you've got a lot more wave action in the shallow bottom than the deep bottom. Which creates more surface area to evaporate.
What other uncertainties?
You have to put regulations on there, right?
Yeah, uncertainty about regulation, and related to that, water quality, right?
I was gonna say water quantity and water quality regulations.
Right.
That then get into construction and permitting and city planning and all that.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years from now, what if there's another PFAS, another emerging contaminant that, we didn't even know about? And Just don't know.
It will be.
Yeah, or will be, right? What others? Anything
I hate
else?
to be a broken record, but I think it needs to be in there, the hazardous waste site at the upper end.
Oh, the Plain Woods?
Yep.
Yeah.
So waste
Sure.
management.
Okay.
Split pine with.
I.e.
Anything else? That's a pretty good list. So Cam, copy that table. We're gonna go to the next sheet where we've got, oops. Got a list of, whoop,
Sorry. Trying to get.
I'm moving at the same time. I'm messing you up probably.
Just to clarify a little bit on Mike's point about the Santee Dam. That dam is known to be seismically deficient because there's no good way to fix a sand
Oh,
embankment on a sand foundation in an earthquake system.
yeah.
Hydraulic
Um,
dam.
So we have made provisions for the protection of life downstream of that dam in the event it fails. It's flat, so the floodways that move quickly. So, there's a very comprehensive emergency action plan associated with that dam. It's safe from all other perspectives. It's just the earthquake loading that you would expect from the recurrence of the Charleston earthquake
It
that
was,
causes issues.
it was determined if we could send a postcard to everybody downstream of the dam, and it would arrive before the water would.
Really?
3.5 days.
Yeah.
It's like more water on the sponge.
Division, yeah, to the end of the.
We did, the very first U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Waterways Experiment Station, Heck 1 study was done on the dam breach analysis for the North Dam.
Yeah.
I don't want a postcard, man, you can call me.
The other thing, if it makes everybody feel any better, the geologic record indicates Charleston earthquake is about 500 to 700 year recurrence period. If you look at the forensic geology you can do with sand boils and some other evidence of earthquakes in the past. So in theory, we've got about another 350 years. before-
Okay. That's outside our 50-year planning
Yeah.
horizon.
I already done it with points before it broke.
Yeah,
And then we had the West Dam incident,
yeah.
and we were accused of staging that. He showed it on those action.
About that time, the lakes will both be filled up with sediment, so
Yeah.
we're good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and those octagons, hexagons, whatever they are on the right are some typical uncertainties in water resources planning, and you've hit on a bunch of them. Some that you didn't mention, maybe economic conditions, if you go through a recession, you might see lower growth in demands, perhaps. Population growth, agricultural output, there could be a big push to grow more crops that are more water intensive because of market conditions. We just don't know. Regulatory, we talked about that. Unplanned outages, that's one. Charleston Water almost experienced that recently. This can happen. So those are some uncertainties that we need to think about when we're thinking about water management strategies. All right, so now we get to the question, what strategies do we want to recommend? And when you think about this, consider strategies that could be effective to adapting to changing conditions. What could be in our toolbox that helps with adaptive management? These are some of the strategies that are already in place. Talked about these. Let's just go right to the table. So we're going to start with demand side strategies for irrigation, so mainly ag and golf courses. And we don't really we've got a golf course representative here. We don't have any ag representatives that can really speak to this, but I can tell you what the discussion's been in other RBCs is that every one of these strategies you see here is important, and it's already existing in use. And they felt that they wanted to always, pretty much unanimously across all the RBCs, the farmers and the growers and they all wanted to maintain this list of strategies. There wasn't one strategy on here that they said, no, get rid of that. All of these are important, not for every grower, but they are in use throughout the state, and they continue to be used at a higher frequency. One of them that was emphasized more recently in some of the coastal plain RBCs is soil management cover cropping. They've kind of prioritized that as that's one of the first things that you want to do is focus on the carbon content of your soil so that you can retain moisture. That's one of the most important things. And you want to do cover cropping to help prevent erosion and washing away of your topsoil and loss of that carbon and that carbon material. So they prioritize that pretty high. We've got a lot of good examples in other basins about how they do irrigation scheduling and use moisture sensors and capture rainwater, pump it through canals back to the top of their farm, and kind of let gravity and combination of pumps and ponds help manage and collect stormwater and reuse water if they happen to over irrigate. There's also a lot of mention about future technologies and leveraging AI coupled with like smart irrigation, moisture sensors to optimize water use. So you're not applying more than you need. You're applying it at the right time in the right growing season and based on the exact crop needs. So there's certain farmers that are really experimenting with future technologies, including AI, to help manage their systems. So all I could recommend to you guys is just that you continue like the rest of the RBCs and put forth this toolbox of multiple strategies for ag and golf courses. You comfortable with that?
So moved.
Okay. And Todd, is there anything else for golf courses? Actually, you mentioned a couple things that we don't really explicitly have here, but you talked about the height of your sprinklers. Yeah, so limiting evaporation, right?
Drip irrigation, did you mention
You
that
mentioned
too?
drip irrigation.
And, there's turf variety.
Turf
I see crop variety,
Right,
so that's in there.
Yeah.
You got nozzle retrofits.
yeah. That one's more focused on center pivot systems and making sure you don't have nozzles that are just throwing a whole bunch of water, and you've got the nozzles low to the crop. So you're not losing water to evaporation. A lot of the RBCs said they don't like those end guns that you see on the center pivot system because they shoot water out over 50, 60 feet and you lose a lot to evaporation. Other farmers said, well, we need them. So I don't know.
Gotta have it. Some steels aren't perfectly round.
Right.
So you gotta have a way to.
Get the corners. Yeah. Okay. We'll go with this list, and again, we'll still try to get some feedback. Maybe I'll send this to Mickey and see if I can get him to kind of bless this list. But it's been blessed by pretty much every other River Basin council that has had ag representation. All right, go ahead.
John Rigo mentioned, we've got a real leader in soil management and cover crop methods in our area in Jason Carter.
Jason, what's his last name?
Carter?
Carter. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, he's the son of Mr. Bunky. If Mr. Bunky's resonates with any of y'all, it's kind of an institution on Garner's Ferry Road.
Anybody know Mr. Bunky?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a restaurant store on the way, on 378, on the way from Myrtle Beach from Clovis.
Okay.
A lot of people stop and eat there.
Yeah, but Jason's very progressive. He's worked with Buzz Clute, I think, in particular on soil management and cover cropping.
Mm-hmm.
What industry is he in, John? Like, what does he do for a living?
Oh, he's a farmer.
Oh.
Okay. Well, John, if you know him, you want to reach out to him and get input from him, that'd certainly be welcome. If he's got anything to add beyond what we've got up here. Okay, let's talk about demand side strategies for municipal water systems, so public water supply. We've got a list of kind of some of the more common, or some of them used to be more common, demand side strategies. What we've done in our other RBCs is kind of walk through each one of these, and in some instances, they said, yeah, these don't really apply anymore. They're not that useful, or they're not useful in our basin. Let's focus our list on the top 5 or 6, and get rid of a few. So that's kind of the exercise I want to do. Plus, I want to make sure we've got everything up here that you think is a potential demand side strategy that's worthwhile and listing in our plan. The first one would be conservation pricing structures. We already have a recommendation in our drought chapter about drought surcharges, I believe. So let's focus on the conservation pricing structures. Alan, you said you've got one in place. Jason left the room. I don't know that Charleston has a conservation-based pricing structure, and Alicia's not here anymore, but do you all think that that is a worthwhile strategy to include?
How does it work?
So 9,200 gallons, which is, roughly 300 a day, is considered a tier 1 charge. So if you're a user, 9,200 a month, you're in an adult rate structure. You break into that next block, it increases and goes all the way up to, we have 4 blocks. So it's a tier 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you're a high user, your bill, if you're irrigating, it could be $500-600 a month. If you're breaking into tier 2 or 3. 97% of all water bills are in block 1. They're in that tier 1 block. So it's really just penalizing those excessive users.
How did you present that idea to the public? Like, were you ever not structured that way?
It's been that way probably, certainly the last 15 years. And so I don't know when it changes. It's a conservation approach. I mean, that was the conversation with the public. We are trying to intentionally conserve water. And so if you're willing to irrigate and that's important to you, you need to pay for that. That meat demand is so expensive.
You don't sell separate irrigation meters?
We will sell separate irrigation.
I think in more water stressed areas, think like the Southwest or something, they have structures that are similar, but they start to kick in with higher rates at an earlier time. So they really try to discourage irrigation.
I feel like when my daughter lived in Arizona, they just had turf on their yard. I don't even think they had grass. That was a rule.
Yeah.
So very effective communication. I think it's an effective communication tool to talk about the importance of water and to emphasize conservation.
It's a good way to assign value to water. So even if that's all it does, I think it could be effective.
What's really nice about it is when you talk about a drought structure. So, okay, we're in a drought condition. Customers are already familiar with the tiered approach of the block, and then we just double it. And so now we're in a drought, so we're just going to double whatever we have.
We're gonna double down.
Double down,
Double
instead of
up.
having to implement a new rate structure that makes it confusing. So,
Yeah.
It's a great idea. Jason, do you have anything like that?
We have a drought surcharge. We're currently, what I would consider a rate structure, although it's a little bit of a misnomer because your bill is going to be somewhat based on the size of your supply line. So you have a tiered structure in regard to the size of your supply line. But it has come up in discussions a couple of times, but currently we only have anything but a flat in our drought surcharge. So nothing inclining rate block yet. It's an ongoing discussion.
Okay. Everybody support that as a recommended strategy? Yeah, okay. Public education of water conservation. I hope nobody says that's not a good strategy. All right, we're gonna keep that one. We'd have problems if somebody said, yeah, get that one out of here.
John raised his hand.
Go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, that was a mistake. I meant to hit the react button rather than the raise the hand button.
Thumbs up. All right. Landscape irrigation programs and codes, time of day watering limits. So basically programs to make irrigation more efficient, limit irrigation to certain days or times. It could be, landscape irrigation programs and codes could be a wide variety of things. Does Mount Pleasant, the Waterworks probably doesn't have one, but the town could have one, right?
if we get into drought, we do. We
You do,
implement our
okay.
drought plan, we do have time of day and days that
Okay.
will allow irrigation. Up until the point that we'll do it even on, depending on your street address.
Yeah. What about Charleston? Do they have
I
any?
mean, up to complete curtailment in a drought, the outside of the drought, no.
No. Okay.
It's all that in our drought plan.
Should that remain as a tool in toolbox or
I think we should keep all the tools in the toolbox.
keep them all? Okay. Leak detection, water loss control programs, again, that's kind of a no-brainer. I think the issue around that one is just, setting rake structures and or outside funding to help maintain and limit leaks. You can only replace so many pipes just because of budget, financial limitations, constraints. So we'll keep that one. Advanced, this kind of goes hand in hand, but advanced metering, automated meter reading, so that kind of ups the game on your ability to control leaks and control water loss. They're kind of expensive, but there's a payback to them, right?
Also the data aspect of it, and I think it's gonna be really cool as AMI becomes a bigger thing. But you're gonna have everybody on their smartphones using their AMI meters, relaying signals and data bandwidth to the utility and to themselves. And so it just gets to another nuanced facet of, it's easy to say we don't like data management centers, but we're gonna increasingly utilize data centers in every single thing we do. So I think AMI is gonna be huge. For people to be able to instantaneously say, oh man, the usage just jumped. Oh, my 11-year-old's taking an hour shower. Let's go address this because the water bill's gonna be horrible, or their sprinkler was left on or whatever. It's gonna be, I think it's gonna be big as far as people understanding their water bill. They're not just getting a once a month reading, but they're able to see throughout the day where their water's going and how that affects how much money they're spending. Like I just spent $50 to fill up the pool, you're gonna know where all that water's going.
Yeah. Okay. All right, now we're getting to some that may be a little questionable, but I'll let y'all decide. Car wash recycling ordinances. Again, in some areas that aren't as water rich, local jurisdictions will pass ordinances that says you have to recycle X amount of your water, if you're a car wash, like 30%, 50%, or even sometimes close to 100%. Think that's needed here?
They keep on building car washes, you're gonna need it. And there's one in every corner.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got more outside that, we're always picking a specific business.
Just because it's a water user, but all businesses are water users. This is just one that, it's been mentioned as a way to save water, so they established sometimes an ordinance around them. But
Also,
kinda
to
shaking
your
his
point, you'd have to say, well, before you bought this property, we're gonna have an ordinance. I mean, on the development side, if you plan to build 10 Tommy's car washes and you don't know about the ordinance or they didn't have it, do you know what I mean? I'm sure there's like a time.
It seems very specific.
It does seem
and
very
probably a small percentage of our water budget.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the Bitcoin mining facility. I mean,
Yeah.
that just seems so targeted to me.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Was somebody, usually these things happen because somebody was passionate about it. Was somebody passionate about car washing?
Yeah.
In another,
In certain, again,
Isn't that how every regulation begins?
Right,
It's
everybody.
passionate issue.
I'm just wondering, 'cause
yeah, no, in certain communities where, again, think the Southwest, where they struggle with water. They're looking for every way to save water, and
Right.
one of them is, well, if we can get the car washes to recycle water, invest in recycle systems that treat the water so they can continue to use it, that could make a difference, along with all the other strategies we're doing.
I mean, the only thing I will caveat would be, we're talking car wash recycling, we're picking on car washes, but anything that you add ordinance to the end of it is easy to come out of somebody's mouth as a great idea because it's something they're passionate about. But ordinances take management, they take policy, they take
Political
a board
planning.
passing it. It takes
Yeah.
people doing inspections during construction. It takes
Yeah.
people doing inspections post-construction. Oftentimes it takes permitting and regulation. It could.
Yeah.
And so it sounds easy enough on a piece of paper, but the second you stick ordinance to it and you say it's very, very feasible, you're not looking at the biggest aspect of feasibility, which is management of the system.
Yeah, yeah. Now, that said, I think there are, and I can't point to a specific one, but I think there's certain car washes that just do recycle some of their water because they've got systems that remove what they need to, dirt and grime, and it's clean enough to continue to reuse, and it's cheaper for them to do that than it is to buy water from their supplier. So
It's not just the water.
it's not just the water.
Sewer bill too.
Well, sewer, yeah, then discharge.
So John, if you put the words in there like water reuse or, I mean, or something. Again, we're targeting car washes, but anyone can do what you just described.
Yeah.
And that's the better steward of the water.
Right.
And through a positive incentivization program versus a permitting or regulatory or ordinance program. They're two totally different things.
Can we, to what we discussed earlier, talk about water recycling and reuse and say businesses consider for your own well-being and the environment? Like say,
Improve recycling programs.
right, and we could list certain businesses that we think like car washes, be aware.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we will do
It
that.
goes back to your saying, us all saying that reuse and recycling is a super important aspect of the whole program.
Yeah,
And not use the word ordinance, because nobody likes the word ordinance, then they don't want to do it anymore.
right.
Right.
We can do that, yeah.
And then
I think we'll probably put water recycling. Well, even though we've got recycling, a car wash recycling ordinance under demand side strategies, we'll probably characterize reclaimed water programs, water recycling programs under supply side strategies. But I have to look and see how we did it in the other river basin plans so we're consistent. Anyway, okay. Here's another ordinance, a water waste ordinance. I can't really give you any specific good examples about this, other than I know they've existed again primarily in more water scarce areas. But it's something that, requires enforcement by utility or the local jurisdiction to be able to go out and patrol and say, hey, you're irrigating your driveway, you're wasting water, that kind of thing. It's not necessarily specific, I don't think, to irrigation, but I can't think right off the bat of another example where they would be enforcing water waste.
And like, who would be the enforcers?
Again, like the utility or the local city, county, state, not state.
I would say again, the enforcer should be that person's water bill. Oh goodness, it was really high. I won't let the hose run for 2 hours by accident next time because I felt the pinch in the bill. That's a lot better than paying somebody $3 an hour to drive around.
Be the
2,000
HOA committee members to walk around.
Looking for somebody's sprinkler on any long time of the day or something.
Yeah.
I made the conscious decision to put in a shallow well, when I put my irrigation system in. It was the meter and paying the freight,
And back.
impact fee and all that stuff.
Okay, so no on water waste ordinance, probably not something we
it's
need
not
to.
specific enough, we don't understand what it means.
Yeah,
Just
okay. We'll probably scratch that one then.
I take one pull out.
Well, we could do water waste through billing, through water waste management, through your billing, your water bill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even on a flat rate, you let your hose run for a couple hours, you're gonna feel it.
Oh, yeah.
Something that used to be more common, which is not as common anymore, is toilet rebate programs. When toilets became more efficient and there was older communities, sometimes utilities would have these rebate programs where you get, $50 or $100 to replace your toilet, which used, 5 gallons instead of 2.3 gallons or whatever it is now. I don't think that happens a whole lot anymore. That was more like 20 years ago. What do y'all think?
I think all the new toilets that come out now are water efficient. So it just took a while for the ones to break or
Yeah.
get replaced.
They probably miss their old toilets, but I think most people have converted.
Yeah, I mean, like, say downtown Charleston, where houses are 200 years old, they probably replace their
They
toilets.
still remodel. They do it. Most.
Yeah, okay. That's one that typically their RBC said, yeah, probably no need anymore. Let's get rid of that. So we'll remove that one too. Residential water audits. I don't know that I can think of any examples in South Carolina where utilities do residential audits, but I can't say that it doesn't happen. You guys ever hear
Anytime
that?
we get a customer call that doesn't understand an unexpected bill increase, which happens more than you would think, we will meet with that customer. And we cannot be the plumber for the customer for a variety of reasons, but we will help them understand, do you have irrigation? Do you have a leak in your irrigation? How many toilets do you have? And are any of them, is the flapper on it not working and it's running 24/7? The water is going through the meter and it's going somewhere, and we do understand some of the questions that they need to be
Do you
asked.
physically go to their residence?
With water quality complaints, we also have water quantity complaints around billing. And I'm not saying every single one results in the homeowner visit, but we have a substantial number that result in homeowner visits where they want to better understand why their bill was $20 or $40 higher this month than it has been the last 10 months. And we'll give them reasons and explanations on the phone call, but just like we give customers reasons and explanations for water quality complaints on the phone, more times than not, they want a person arriving at their house, giving them that level of customer service. So we have a lot of call outs for both quantity and quality.
Okay. Do you think that's more education and outreach, or does that kind of venture into an audit type of thing?
Customer service.
Customer,
I mean, we don't have an audit program, but
Yeah.
I think you could say it's an education program. But I think with the AMI, as you have more advanced metering and you could have alerts set up on your phone for when your usage goes higher than it should and things like that. I think that's going to be a big component of auditing and education both.
okay, so I think we can still describe what, you're shaking your head too, like, it sounds like you guys do
We have
that.
staff, we have two staff members that we call them conservation technicians.
Mhm.
They do exactly that. They go out and meet with the customer, check the toilets for them. You know, oftentimes it's either it's a pull fill valve stuck open, it's your ice maker, it's just using a lot of water and you didn't know it, or it's a flapper, and there's pretty easy things to educate the customer on. But John, what I noticed about this residential water audit, I don't know that that's how we classify our service. But you may want to have some type of, the utility itself needs to be performing water audits. And there's some do, some don't. There's a frequency that's different, but, annual is probably too often, but maybe there is a 5-year water audit or some recommendation.
Or are you saying that's different from a leak control program or loss control program, or same thing?
And we talked about that more in the last meeting, Alan, with applying the UAWW standard around water loss versus non-revenue water.
Yeah.
So
I would say water audit defined, leak detection and water loss control programs would fit underneath the water audit in my mind.
I would also call it a residential water use review with clients, because audit is another negative word.
Yeah.
Audit also means numbers, right?
Mhm.
Just numbers, not let's be conservative, let's look at what's stuck.
Okay,
You
yeah,
know,
that probably better characterizes what Mount Pleasant, Charleston do.
Right. Yeah.
yeah, and I will say, I don't know, it'll be interesting as AMI gets more advanced, how much we're able to ascribe a certain monthly water bill to toilet flushing, showers, irrigation. But Dominion, Brandon should be listening and he should be, his ears should be burning as I'm talking now. But my latest Dominion bill broke down my monthly electric charges by refrigerator, HVAC, all that. I don't know how in the world they get that. I guess they can look at different levels of power and then describe the different components and appliances and stuff. But it is really cool to be able to see on your $150 electric bill, how much is that second refrigerator you thought you really needed.
Give you,
So
to give you an anecdote on that. I used to fuss at my kids all the time for leaving the lights on, leaving the curling iron on, sort of thing. My daughter and her kids live on Daniel Island, and she's been getting that kind of bill. So, about 3 weeks ago, she called, she said, "Dad, I forgive you." I said, "Well, what did I do wrong?" She said, "Now I know why you yelled at me about keeping the lights on, because it was a clear indicator on her bill that the lights in the house were a major component of her power bill."
Really?
I was proven correct after 40 years.
I was gonna say, I thought it would be the opposite.
Long we have to wait to get the thanks from our children.
I would have thought she would have called and said, "I told you so. Look how little my light."
She was surprised at how.
And she must still be using like old incandescent lighting or something.
But another thing that utilities don't do, there's a water meter, but there's not a sewer meter.
Yeah.
So it's assumed that water that comes in goes out through the sewer. One thing that I know Georgetown County Water and Sewer, you can question your water bill. And if you've got a leak and it's proven, or if you've refilled your pool, that sort of thing, and you can prove it, they're not gonna cut you a break on your water bill because you bought that water and you used it. They will, however, cut you a break on your sewer bill.
Okay. Yeah. John, did you have a comment?
Oh, yeah, well, I put my hand up back there in the the car wash recycling, so, but
Oh, I'm
I did
sorry.
want to just point out quickly the public service function of that, because I mean, I do think a lot of the public car washes, as a matter of course, do recycle a lot of their water. But you know, from a public education viewpoint, just knowing that they recycle it discourages or, I mean, it's incentive for people that might wash their cars in their driveways, you know, with all that runoff and likely using more water than you would in the public car wash. I think there's almost sort of a public education purpose in that, because it gets people thinking, gosh, I'm not going to do I'm not going to wash my car in my driveway. That's just all wasted. Whereas with car wash, I know it's getting recycled, likely treated even.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yep. Okay, the last one on this list, building code requirements. So, you know, a local jurisdiction would require as part of a building code, certain water efficiency standard for new construction. That one's a little more controversial potentially.
And you already have a universal plumbing code that's adopted in most areas.
Yeah.
I don't know how much more efficient you're gonna make some of the fixtures.
Yeah.
Unless you can tile the roof and fixtures, that would help at my house pretty significantly.
So I'm not hearing a lot of backing behind that one. So, okay, we won't include that one. Anything else on the demand side for municipal use, mainly residential use, but some commercial use? Anything else you can think of that's not on here, not including recycled water programs? Okay. This is a kind of a, you know, it's a list of industrial and energy water conservation efficiency strategies, but it kind of pulls from both the municipal and a little bit from the other one, the ag one. But, you know, on this, you know, there's all different types of manufacturing water use, right? With different processes and, you know, everything from manufacturing to, you know, AI, where you're really not manufacturing anything other than data or answers or whatever. So it's hard to come up with a comprehensive list here other than some of the things we have on the screen, like water audits. Energy companies can give rebates for energy efficient appliances, and that lowers overall energy demand, which then lowers overall energy production, which then potentially would lower overall energy water use, right? Here we've got water recycling and water reuse, which is often important for manufacturing. You know, they don't like to have to pay for a lot of water, and if there's an opportunity to reuse the water, they do. Water saving equipment, efficient water systems. What we've heard in some of the other RBCs when there's been industrial manufacturing representatives is that that's been going on for a long time. They try to minimize their water use because, again, it's a cost to them. So there's not a lot of whole additional gains to come up with there. You know, some of the same residential or municipal type strategies, installing water saving fixtures, toilets, education. Anything you want to add to that list or anything that should go off that list? We got a little more general when we start talking about industrial and energy type of demand side strategies, just because it's harder to come up with a comprehensive list. But Michael, you have anything to add there?
Nothing's coming to mind.
Okay. Okay. What I did have but I want to make sure we close out the loop on this, is a supply side discussion. We talked about recycled water programs, and Alan, you've indicated that this basin plan should highlight that there's opportunity to expand recycled water programs. We will reflect that when we write up Chapter 7 and let you react to it and make sure you're comfortable with the language and the rest of the RBC is. Are there any other supply side strategies based on the preliminary results that you've seen that you would like to emphasize in the plan? I feel like there's enough interconnections between utilities in the basin to have necessary resiliency. That's one that's been discussed in some of the other RBCs. you don't have as many water utilities here as they do like up in the Broad or some of the other basins. You've got some more regional type systems, that are already are kind of inherently, resiliency is built in because of multiple sources. No new reservoirs. What about conjunctive use? I think we've talked about that it's already in use, and it makes sense depending on the user, right? This one should be listed, right? Anything else?
Yeah, not around here.
On the groundwater side, this basin, there wasn't any specific areas where there's emerging concerns as far as like, oh, this thunder depression we need to keep our eye on, or there's an opportunity for, there's a lot more use in the Crouch Branch aquifer here or something that, I mean, there's no supply side groundwater strategies that you might suggest, is there?
I mean, no, because, I mean, I know that in the upper portion, we do have a lot of use in the Crouch Branch from agriculture. And, I mean, that would be agricultural efficiency to apply there. We're adding another well up there so that we can track it more effectively. But coated depression, obviously there's the large, lower pressure area over Center River, like Mount Pleasant. But that has not worsened over time. It's actually rebounded some. So I can't think of, besides conjunctive use and using their ASR, anything that they are not already employing as a strategy would help that. And then on the other side of the basin, more commonly, I guess, looking at the Gordon aquifer, that one's been going down, but it's such a lesser used aquifer. It affects people more so that are not with permitted use. It's more domestic, residential, small farms that are not triggered in the capacity use area. So, interconnectivity to, maybe like rural or smaller water utilities could be a strategy to help those areas if things became a bigger problem, but it's not, as we were talking, when we were going over groundwater, there's still so much space, so much head space for the water to decline before we start really impacting aquifers. It's not something that I think we can really clearly suggest without them on it. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Does that make sense to everybody else?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so we've got recycled water programs, we've got ASR, got existing interconnections, got conjunctive use. Those are generally the supply side strategies that we're comfortable continuing to recommend. All right. Well, we're almost up at the top of the hour. Next time, September 9th is our next meeting, and Michael will be here again, right? Good, okay. We will bring results. In fact, we'll submit them to you prior to the meeting of some additional modeling where we update the dead pool. We're going to do the permit register scenario. We're probably going to try to work in some synthetic droughts to show you those results. We'll spend a little bit of time just reviewing those results in the meeting. But I'm not going to go through all the same detail we did here just to save time, because we're getting pressed for time as we wrap up near the end of the year. What we want to focus on next time is finishing our recommendations. So we still have some chartreuse bucket recommendations that we need to revisit. You can wear that shirt again if you want. And the top of the category of recommendations we haven't touched on yet are technical and program recommendations. So examples of those are like, how do we fill data gaps? What additional monitoring do we need? What additional studies might we recommend for the future? Like, do we need to be concerned about land use changes and how that might impact things? And are there studies or modeling we could do to better evaluate impacts of land use changes? Those are some of the examples. Some of the other RBCs suggest, well, that's ordinance policy. Never mind, forget that. So be thinking about technical recommendations that you might want to make. again, that focus mainly on monitoring, data gaps, additional studies. We're also going to take the planning process recommendations and the recommendations that you've already approved and start to wrap those up in an overall implementation plan, which is chapter 10 of your River Basin plan. The implementation plan develops overarching strategies that meet broad objectives that you're going to agree to. And then within each one of those strategies are specific actions that you or DES or others might take to implement those strategies. We'll start developing that plan for you and let you kind of react to it. But we'll have to go through that pretty quick. The good news is we've got similar implementation plans in 6 other basins that this has been done as a start. And they always end up being pretty similar. So we've got a good starting point. We'll try to get through most of that at the next meeting. I also sent you chapter 4 to review, which is the demands chapter. I think I put in my email when I would like to have comments back on that chapter. Send me any comments you have. We're going to start sending you additional chapters, like chapter 3. Brooke's been working on the groundwater part, so we're going to add the groundwater part and send that back out. We're going to be putting together chapter 5, which summarizes the modeling that we just did, the water availability assessment, but we can't finish that until we do this additional modeling. So you might not get that before the next meeting. It'll probably be after the September meeting. You'll also start to see chapter 6 and 7, which talk about water management strategies. You've already seen chapter 8. Chapter 9, we can't finish until we finish the recommendations discussion. And that's what we're going to try to finish at the next meeting. Come October, then we should be pretty close to having a draft plan all together, and we'll be tying up some loose ends, finalizing any remaining recommendations, any additional modeling that you want to have looked at. But we need to be able to have a public meeting, like no later than I think I have a slide for it. Public meeting, like, no later than November. We have to have a 30-day comment period. We have to address public comments and then finalize the plan, and we need to get that all done by December. Good news is we got most of what we wanted from you all to be able to inform the state water plan. A lot of that we tied up today with your discussion of water management strategies and look at the modeling and availability. So we're good there, but we still want to try to finish the plan before the end of the year. So that's what our next 4 months kind of looks like. Any questions?
I just have a question on our meeting for next week.
Yeah.
Is our SWAM modeling. Where are we meeting?
Operation.
Yeah, our main office complex in that big conference room that's got 6 screens in it. I think that might be beneficial.
The coffee we can't use because we're not part of the paid program.
Right.
So I'll be bringing mine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll provide lunch. I probably won't be I won't be bringing, I can bring coffee if y'all want it. Okay.
I'm sorry.
They're all next to Water State. They won't cover it for us.
I'll bring my own little pods and just put them in there.
There you go.
I haven't ordered lunch yet, but if you do want to attend and you have an RSVP, please reply to my email, so I know how many are attending, so I can order the right amount of lunches and have the right amount of laptops there. I think we're going to have close to 10 folks there, like 7 or 8 RBC members and a couple of DES folks. You'll have to check in at the main office like we did before.
You can probably start, swap straight across the.
Oh, good.
parking lot.
Okay, parking won't be as much of a challenge for him.
Yeah.
Good, okay. Try to show up like right around 9. We want to start as early as we can. We'll have the laptops hopefully all fired up. Michael, I may get there. Kirk, myself, and Cam may get there. I don't know if we can get there like 7:30 or so, or if that's too early.
Should be all right. I think I had the room reserved today.
Okay.
Yeah.
It might not take us that long. We just need to boot up all the laptops. This won't be offered virtually, so there will be no virtual attendance. If you want to come, you got to be there in person. One more thing I'll mention. There's a possibility that September or October, we might need to have a second meeting if we're still trying to tie up loose ends. It might be a virtual meeting where we just hold it for a couple hours just to make some decisions, but we'll see come September if that's going to be necessary. Everybody comfortable with the pace? You feel like we're rushing things too much, or you okay? I don't want to skip by anything or any discussions that need to happen that are important, but we do have limited time. We can always do more meetings if we need to. All right. Anything else, Michael, before we wrap it up? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you online folks for staying with us. Yep. Meeting adjourned.
John.